Beneath the silent weight of ruins, the wind carries whispers no tongue remembers. Stones cracked by centuries breathe out fragments of prophecy, carved by hands long returned to dust. Once, these walls echoed with laughter, with lore, with the pulse of power. Now they lie abandoned, yet not mute. For every broken column, every buried tablet, is a warning etched across time. That power rises, power falls, and only memory endures. The night stretches its velvet veil across forgotten cities, and in the hush, their voices return. They speak of fate unbending, of mortality unescapable, of legacies fragile as sand. The stars above remain unchanged, watching as each empire burns its name into darkness, only to fade into echo. The ruins do not mourn, they remember, and in remembering, they prophesy. The road is the first empire, older than kings, older than walls, older than the voices that inscribed laws upon clay. Long before armies carved boundaries into maps, the earth itself bore faint trails of passage. Hunters pressed them into soil, herders widened them with their flocks, and caravans sanctified them with their endless tread. Roads were more than pathways. They were lifelines, binding hunger to supply, isolation to connection, dream to reality. To follow a road was to surrender to destiny, to bind oneself to strangers, and to fates unknown. Roads ruled silently, not with armies, but with the gravity of necessity. They carried wealth, but they also carried doom. The Silk Road was not a single path, but a living web stretched across the face of continents. Its strands touched deserts where heat scorched by day and frost cut by night. They climbed mountains where air thinned to agony and storms buried men beneath white silence. They crossed seas where waves rose like walls, erasing horizon and hope alike. This web breathed like an organism, pulsing with caravans that marched in rhythm. Camels swayed like ships, their bells ringing softly as if in prayer. Horses carried riders entrusted with scrolls sealed in wax. Merchants bent beneath bales of silk, glass, spice, and jade, each step a gamble between fortune and grave. From the arteries of this road rose cities like sudden blossoms in barren soil. Samarkand glimmered with turquoise domes, Palmyra shone with colonnades, Dunhuang guarded the desert's edge with painted caves. These cities were not born of rivers or fertile fields, but of traffic, their lifeblood the caravans that paused at their gates. Their markets overflowed with voices, Greek, Persian, Indian, Chinese, clashing and mingling in a chorus of trade. Coins minted in far-off lands exchanged hands beside bolts of silk, jars of saffron and ivory carvings. Their temples absorbed foreign gods as casually as merchants traded goods. Idols of Buddha, Zoroaster, and local spirits shared altars in uneasy truce. Such crossroads were crucibles, melting boundaries of culture and belief, binding what distance once forbade. But every blessing carries its curse. Roads did not only carry treasures, they carried shadows. Bandits stalked mountain passes, their ambushes as sudden as lightning from a clear sky. Pirates haunted the seas, turning caravans of wealth into hostages of ransom. Plagues traveled invisibly, hidden in breath and cloth, transforming thriving markets into silent tombs. Empires stretched hands for tolls, their promises of safety often hollow, their greed consuming more than their protection preserved. A caravanserai's lantern gave warmth to the weary, yet its glow revealed itself to enemies waiting beyond the dunes. To walk the road was to accept peril as constant companion, for danger was stitched as tightly into its fabric as fortune. Rome's appetite for silk was insatiable, its senators draping themselves in garments so sheer they seemed woven from moonlight. Gold poured eastward in torrents, filling coffers in foreign lands while draining Rome's own. The empire grew clothed in splendor, yet hollow in wealth, and irony whispered even in its own streets. In the east, the Han dynasty yearned for the mighty horses of the steppes, beasts fierce enough to repel nomadic raids. Their hunger was as relentless as Rome's, and the Silk Road bound them together in mutual dependence. But dependence is also exposure, a chain disguised as connection. To rely on the road was to surrender one's veins to foreign blades. The artery that nourished also threatened to bleed them dry. Still, the road seduced as surely as it endangered. Who could resist its promises, spices that seemed to contain the fire of alien suns, fabrics softer than breath itself, stones brighter than the night sky. Kings waged wars, emperors signed decrees, and merchants walked months through peril simply to touch what lay beyond the horizon. The road's allure was more than material, it was spiritual. To walk it was to step into myth, to believe that life could be expanded, that destiny could be bent. Roads carried hope as much as goods, feeding the eternal hunger for more, for elsewhere, for the eternal. Empires rose on that hunger and empires broke upon it, never learning restraint. At night, the Silk Road was a cathedral of silence. Lanterns flickered weakly against the endless dark, their flames trembling in the breath of the desert wind. Stars burned cold and watchful, indifferent to the crawling line of men and beasts below. Around campfires, merchants whispered songs, their voices trembling but steady, a fragile defense against despair. Every flicker of light was a fragile island, every note a bridge across the abyss of shadow. In those moments, the road seemed less a human invention than a destiny carved by the earth itself. And in that cathedral of night, empires were stripped of their illusions, reduced to the same fragile flame that burned upon the sand. The lesson of the road is merciless. To open it is to expose oneself. Roads bind, but binding also makes vulnerable. They promise wealth, but they demand tribute, in coin, in blood, in silence. They reveal empires as they truly are, not invincible, but fragile, not eternal but passing, not masters but servants to paths older than their crowns. The Silk Road's whisper is unchanging across centuries. The same artery that delivers life will one day carry ruin. Roads endure, empires do not. The first law is written not in stone or ink, but in dust, in footsteps, in echoes. The path that binds is the path that breaks. Geography has always been the true sovereign of roads, the silent tyrant shaping destinies. The Silk Road bowed to deserts that burned by day and froze by night, forcing travelers into fragile alliances with oases that were lifelines in the void. The Taklamakan devoured those who strayed even slightly from the marked path, its dunes swallowing men, beasts, and memory alike. In the Pamir Mountains, the sky thinned until lungs screamed for air, storms burying whole caravans beneath sudden avalanches. Even seas held no mercy, their waves rearing like beasts to crush ships beneath indifferent horizons. Geography never yielded. Men adapted or perished, and in adapting they bound themselves further to the road's demands. Night amplified geography's dominion. Lanterns bobbed weakly against the infinite dark, each flame an act of defiance against the world's indifference. The desert wind howled like an ancient hymn, carrying with it the voices of those lost before. Stars glimmered unchanging, reminding merchants of both eternity and insignificance. Around campfires, stories became as vital as bread. Tales of distant lands or past heroes whispered as talismans against fear. Every note of song was an act of survival, each flicker of flame a fragile assertion that life endured. The road at night was more than a passage. It was a cathedral, one where silence and shadow were the high priests presiding over fragile prayers. Yet within this cathedral, more than goods moved. Ideas and faiths, as elusive as smoke, traveled along the Silk Road with as much power as silk or spice. Buddhism crept eastward, its serene statues carried in caravans beside bolts of cloth. Islam surged westward, its verses etched in memory, reaching markets as swiftly as merchants. Christianity rode on traders' tongues, finding converts far beyond its birthplace. Even older fires of Zoroaster flickered in caravanserais, mingling with new creeds. The road was less a marketplace than a crucible, melting myths together, reforging belief into unfamiliar shapes. Empires often feared armies, but it was the road's invisible preachers who transformed civilizations more profoundly. But belief could not shield against the toll of envy. For every city made prosperous by trade, another looked on with longing and rage. Samarkand's wealth drew conquerors who could not bear to see such splendor outside their control. Palmyra's columns eventually fell to Rome's fury. Its prosperity turned to dust. Prosperity made cities magnets not only for caravans, but for destruction. The very road that enriched them guided their enemies to their gates. Every lantern lit in welcome was also a beacon to those who desired conquest. Roads nourished, but they also betrayed. pointing the way for those who came not to trade, but to take. Empires believed themselves stronger than these betrayals. Rome paved its Appian way. Certain stone would outlast decay. The Tang dynasty fortified its passes, convinced armies could guard arteries forever. Byzantium taxed its markets, thinking revenue would shield against collapse. Yet each of these powers, despite their roads, fell. Dust reclaimed Rome's highways. Tang garrisons vanished beneath rebellion. Byzantium's markets shifted to new seas. Roads endured, but their masters did not. Roads are mirrors, and mirrors reveal fragility as mercilessly as they reflect strength. What empires see as monuments are in truth reflections of their own impermanence. Today, BRICS repeats the wager, building corridors across oceans and continents. Their caravans are ships stacked with containers. Their oases are ports glowing beneath electric light. Their contracts written not in sand, but in ink and steel. Yet the principle has not changed. A corridor of rail can be broken as easily as a caravan ambushed in a gorge. A pipeline is an artery, but every artery can bleed. Fiber optic cables, humming invisibly beneath oceans, can be severed in an instant. The form is modern, but the law remains ancient. Roads never relinquish their dominion. They demand vigilance, tribute, and sacrifice, whether in silk or in oil, whether in coin or in data. Dependence on roads breeds not only fragility but rivalry. Along the Silk Road, Rome and Parthia quarreled endlessly, their conflicts ignited by the wealth flowing between them. The steppes became battlegrounds where empires fought to control the flow of horses, gold, and men. Today, the echoes resound in sanctions, blockades, and trade wars, modern tools of the same ancient instinct. To control the arteries of wealth is to command survival. Yet history warns that no empire holds such control for long. Roads slip from fingers like water, flowing where they will, carving new routes through ruin and renewal alike. The fragility of these bonds lies in their very strength. Roads unite strangers across impossible distances, but in uniting they expose. A famine in one land becomes hunger in another. A blockade in one port becomes silence in countless markets. What appears as strength is in truth vulnerability. Rome bled gold for silk. The Han weakened beneath nomadic raids. Cities swelled with prosperity only to collapse under invasion. Roads promise permanence, but they are only bridges suspended over uncertainty. A single storm, a single war, a single silence is enough to break them. Thus, the law of roads whispers again. Connection is both salvation and peril. Roads do not ask permission, they demand obedience. They entice with visions of fortune but conceal their cost in shadows. Empires walk them, convinced they can master their flow, but mastery is illusion. The Silk Road stands as witness, its echoes carried on the desert wind. Those who walk gain wealth, but those who depend are broken. Roads are not possessions but powers, older than thrones, older than memory. They remain when kings are dust, and they wait, patient and merciless, for the next empire to gamble upon them. The Silk Road's greatest secret was not wealth, but exhaustion. Every empire that claimed to master it discovered the same truth. Roads expand until they cannot breathe. Rome overreached, its armies stretched thin, its treasuries bleeding coin as fast as its legions bled lives. The Han dynasty spread itself across deserts and steppes, exhausting soldiers and supplies in endless skirmishes with nomads who refused to be subdued. Byzantium taxed its arteries until traders turned away to safer seas. Roads promise expansion, but expansion is hunger disguised as destiny. To feed on the road is to enter a cycle of endless appetite, and appetite always consumes its master in the end. Silence was the first sign of collapse. Caravanserais once alive with chatter grew quiet, their lanterns unlit, their wells dry. Markets once vibrant with shouting fell still, their stalls shuttered, their coins worthless. A city's silence was more terrifying than an army's shout, for silence meant the road had shifted, leaving it behind. No siege was required, no plague necessary. Abandonment alone was enough to strangle a city into ruin. The same desert that once birthed it reclaimed it, indifferent and patient. Palmyra, once radiant, now lies in ruin. Samarkand, once a jewel, suffered long eclipses before reviving. Roads build cities and roads unmake them, as effortlessly as wind erases tracks in sand. Yet the dream of immortality never dies. Every empire, even as it watches others fall, imagines itself immune. The Romans thought their stone roads eternal. The Tang believed their soldiers could guard forever. The Ottomans trusted their caravans would last as long as the call to prayer. Today, BRICS believes its steel, its oil, its cables, its banks will endure. Each believes it can break the cycle, yet the road teaches otherwise. For the law is unbending. No empire owns a road. Roads are borrowed, and the debt always comes due. The toll is collapse, and the collector is time. Consider the merchants themselves, forgotten in the shadows of kings. They bore the true cost of the road, trudging across wastes, braving storms, bargaining with strangers who might become enemies at any moment. They carried more than goods. They carried rumors, languages, and fragments of faith. A merchant who set out from China might never see home again, his bones left in foreign soil. Yet his risk stitched worlds together, binding empires that never spoke face to face. Their toil was unmarked, their graves unremembered, yet they were the lifeblood. Without them, no emperor's dream of trade could survive. Their anonymity is proof that roads belong not to rulers, but to those who walk them. The road's legacy is more than ruins. It is memory etched into the human spirit. Even after silence swallowed caravanserais, the idea of the road lingered, resurfacing as sea routes, then as rails, then as air lanes, and now as digital cables. The form changes, the principle does not. Roads are eternal in essence, but fleeting in shape, shifting to suit the age. The Silk Road whispers through every modern corridor, reminding us that wealth is only the surface, that the true current beneath is vulnerability. BRICS inherits this lesson whether it acknowledges it or not. To weave new roads is to gamble on old truths. At night, the ghosts of the Silk Road still walk. The wind across deserts carries their whispers, of camels laden with jade, of soldiers dying nameless in passes, of priests whispering prayers in forgotten tongues. The stars, unchanged, look down as they did centuries ago, silent witnesses to the futility of permanence. Roads echo with footsteps long faded, yet their law resounds. They tell us that connection is power, but also peril, that fortune is fleeting but exposure eternal. Empires hear the whispers, but few listen, and fewer obey. The road's patience is endless, and it waits for each to test its mercy. The law of roads stands as the first and most merciless of empire's lessons. Roads do not bend to kings. Kings bend to roads. They lure with wealth. They punish with fragility. They promise eternity while concealing collapse. To open them is to bind oneself, to expose the veins of empire to the knife of chance. Rome learned it. The Han learned it. Byzantium learned it. And BRICS will one day learn it as well. Roads endure when thrones crumble. Their dust outlasts crowns. Their silence outlasts armies. They are older than empires, and will survive the last empire as easily as they survived the first. And so part one of this story closes with the first law inscribed in sand and memory alike. The path that binds is the path that breaks. No empire can alter this truth. It is the oldest prophecy, whispered in winds that outlast stone, carved in tracks that outlive kings. The road gives, the road takes, and in the end it is the road, not the empire, that endures. Wealth is a weight, unseen yet inescapable. Gold gleams like the sun caught in metal, silver shines like frozen moonlight, and silk shimmers like breath woven into cloth. But beneath their beauty lies gravity, pulling empires into orbits they cannot escape. What begins as desire becomes dependence, and dependence becomes chain. Rome longed for silk until its coffers bled dry. China longed for horses until its armies weakened under the cost. Gold flows, but never without consequence. To chase wealth is to accept its law, that every treasure carried on the road carries also the seed of ruin. The Silk Road's brilliance was built on hunger for the rare, the exquisite, the unattainable. Spices from India promised to cure disease and awaken desire. Porcelain from China seemed as delicate as crystallized air. Gems from Afghanistan caught the light like fragments of heaven. Each caravan bore not necessities, but luxuries, items men did not need but could not resist. This made the road both irresistible and perilous. For when empires build their strength on luxuries, their foundations rest on sand. To crave what cannot be produced at home is to surrender sovereignty to strangers. Markets became theaters of obsession. Imagine a Roman senator, fingering a bolt of silk so fine it slipped like water between his hands, dismissing warnings that the treasury shrank with every purchase. Imagine a Chinese general gazing at the broad chest of a steppe horse, convinced only such beasts could save his frontier, willing to spend fortunes for a herd. In bazaars, merchants fed these hungers with practiced smiles, their stalls heavy with promises. But promises are dangerous cargo. For every coin spent is a link forged in a chain, and empires soon found themselves bound, not free, by the glitter they so adored. Gold itself became the axis upon which the road spun. Rome sent it east in endless streams, its mines straining to replace what vanished into silks and spices. The Han dynasty accumulated treasure, only to pour it out again in gifts, tributes, and bribes meant to secure borders. Wealth became a tide, flowing one way, receding another, but never resting. This flow reshaped empires as surely as rivers carve valleys. For gold does not lie idle. It moves, it gathers, it shifts the balance of power wherever it rests. And those who lose it learn too late that hunger is not satisfied by splendor, but wealth is a mirage as much as a weight. Caravans dazzled with precious cargo, yet many ended in ruin. Storms buried spices, bandits stole silks. Gold was spilled into desert sands where no hand could retrieve it. Cities thrived on passing treasure, only to collapse when roots shifted, their prosperity revealed as illusion. Wealth glitters, but it is never permanent. Like a mirage on the horizon, it beckons, promises, seduces, and vanishes. Those who chase it discover emptiness, yet the chase never ends. Empires fall, but the hunger for gold endures, eternal as the desert sun. And now in our age, BRICS steps into the same gravity. Oil, rare earths, and currencies replace silk and spice, yet the principle is unchanged. To build economies on such treasures is to enter the orbit of wealth's pull. Each nation seeks to hold gold in new forms, reserves, energy, influence, yet in seeking they bind themselves. The same hunger that built Samarkand's domes now builds summits where ministers speak of power. The road has shifted, but the mirage remains. Wealth promises eternity, but its weight drags even the greatest empires to their knees. Wealth has always been worshipped as if it were divine. In the marketplaces of the Silk Road, coins gleamed like holy relics, their shine enough to silence doubt and stir desire. A single chest of gold could command armies, bend laws, or topple rulers. Yet beneath its glitter lay the weight of chains unseen. Rome's senators argued endlessly about their dependence on silk, some condemning it as weakness, others celebrating it as status. In truth, both sides were trapped. For every bolt of fabric, a little more sovereignty was surrendered. To crave what lies beyond one's borders is to place destiny in another's hands. And empires, proud as they are, rarely admit such dependence until it is too late. The gravity of wealth was not limited to kings and courts. Common folk too felt its pull. A farmer in Persia might abandon his fields to join a caravan, dreaming of fortunes that dance just beyond the horizon. A craftsman in India might work by lamplight, shaping beads or textiles bound for markets he would never see, his labor feeding hungers he could not imagine. Gold became the universal lure, bending men's lives as effortlessly as it bent empires. The Silk Road was not merely a trade route, it was a tide, pulling all who touched it into its current, whether willingly or not. But wealth is fickle, shifting its loyalties as easily as the wind shifts dunes. Cities that thrived one century were forgotten the next, bypassed by new routes or undone by war. Palmyra's grandeur turned to rubble when Rome tired of its independence. Merv once flourished, then fell silent when caravans diverted elsewhere. Even mighty Constantinople, perched at the crossroads of East and West, discovered that control of wealth is never permanent. Gravity pulls, but it also drags. The more an empire clings to its treasure, the heavier the burden becomes, until the very weight of its wealth drags it into ruin. There is a paradox in gold. It promises stability, but breeds instability. The more Rome imported silk, the more its own currency weakened, its mines unable to match the outflow. The more the Han showered steppe tribes with treasure to buy peace, the more those tribes grew strong enough to threaten the empire anew. Wealth meant to secure survival, instead hastened decline. Like a star collapsing under its own gravity, empires that gathered too much found themselves crushed by their riches. Splendor blinded them to weakness, and weakness arrived disguised as opulence. Markets reflected this contradiction in miniature. Within their stalls, luxury whispered promises of immortality, perfumes to mask decay, gems to capture eternity's light, cloth to veil the body in illusions of permanence. Yet these luxuries carried with them the seeds of fragility. Silk decayed, spices spoiled, jewels tempted thieves. The illusion of lasting glory crumbled in the hands of those who held it. Still, the chase continued. For wealth is not rational. It is fever. To walk through a market was to step into a storm of hunger. Each coin spent not only buying goods but feeding a dream. Today, BRICS walks in this same storm, though its currencies are different. Oil glimmers where silk once shimmered. Rare earth minerals hum with promise like ancient spices once did. Digital wealth flows through invisible networks, fragile as any caravan of old. Nations gather reserves, build banks, and forge alliances, believing wealth will anchor them. Yet wealth does not anchor, it pulls. Its gravity tugs at their unity. For what unites in prosperity can divide in crisis. The same currency that seems a shield today may become a chain tomorrow. The law has not changed. To pursue wealth is to enter its orbit, and no empire escapes its pull unscathed. The illusion of wealth is most dangerous when it feels permanent. In the heart of empires, rulers mistook glitter for solidity, silk for strength, and spice for security. Banquets glowed with gold, palaces swelled with marble, and processions dazzled citizens with jewels that seemed eternal. Yet beneath the spectacle, treasuries emptied, mines faltered, and debts grew. Wealth is a mask, radiant enough to blind even those who wear it. Rome clothed itself in splendor, even as it hollowed from within. The Han maintained tribute payments while frontier garrisons went hungry. The shine concealed the shadow until the shadow swallowed all. The Silk Road itself was built on this tension. Its caravans promised endless supply, but every journey risked disaster. Merchants carried fortunes that could vanish in a single raid, yet they marched on, driven by hunger as irresistible as thirst in desert heat. Wealth's mirage compelled them to walk, even when they knew the cost. The road gave, but it also demanded. For every caravan that arrived safely with silks and spices, another disappeared into silence. Stories of vanished traders haunted the night, yet never stemmed the tide. Men pursued wealth not because it was safe, but because it shimmered like water to the thirsty. Silence, when it came, was louder than gold's clink. A road abandoned, a market emptied, a city deserted. These were the gravestones of wealth's mirage. Palaces built on trade collapsed into ruin, their gilded halls stripped bare by time and conquest. The desert reclaimed caravanserais, their wells dry, their walls broken. Inscriptions faded from memory, leaving only fragments to hint at lives once rich. Wealth does not endure. Its absence is always swifter than its presence. Yet the pursuit never ends, for the mirage remains as seductive as ever, luring the next empire to repeat the cycle. The modern world is no different, though its symbols have changed. Gold reserves still glimmer in vaults, but oil barrels, rare earths, and digital currencies now command the greater hunger. BRICS nations gather these treasures as their ancestors once gathered silk, seeking to anchor their futures in abundance. Yet abundance bends into chain. A single sanction, a disrupted pipeline, a crash of markets, and what seemed eternal reveals itself as fragile. The mirage shimmers in new forms, yet it is no less deceptive. The law is unbroken, wealth is gravity, and gravity pulls until it crushes. To chase gold in any form is to forget mortality. Empires imagine their splendor eternal, but history whispers otherwise. Rome's palaces crumble, the Han's treasures lie buried, the bazaars of Palmyra echo with silence. BRICS may rise, but its wealth too will feed the same cycle. For wealth is not a savior but a weight. It binds, it blinds, and it breaks. The Silk Road's ghosts speak softly still. Wealth promises glory, but demands ruin. To obey its gravity is to walk a circle without end, each empire falling where the last once fell. Thus ends the second law, inscribed not in ink but in collapse, the mirage of wealth. It glitters, it seduces, it enslaves. To build upon it is to build upon shifting sand, beautiful until it crumbles. Wealth is both the brightest flame and the surest ash, a star that burns until it devours itself. Empires rise dazzled and fall blinded, and so the law is eternal. Gold is gravity, and all who chase it will one day fall. Distance is the oldest barrier, the silent wall that no army, no emperor, no merchant can fully conquer. Mountains rise like fortresses built by the earth itself, deserts stretch like oceans of shifting dust, and seas divide continents with horizons that taunt the eye. The Silk Road wound its way through these immensities, never straight, always bending to the will of terrain. Every caravan was an act of defiance, every journey a gamble against geography's cruelty. Distance is not merely space, it is trial, it is tax, it is fate. To live within its grasp is to accept that power depends not only on ambition, but on the mercy of the earth. The Taklamakan Desert was a graveyard disguised as a passage. Its name whispered fear. He who enters does not return. Sandstorms buried men and camels alive, swallowing entire caravans in a single day. Travelers clung to its edges, following fragile trails from oasis to oasis, each one a flicker of life in an ocean of death. Wells became shrines, their water guarded like holy relics, for without them the desert showed no pity. The Silk Road was less a road than a fragile chain of breaths, stretched across a landscape determined to silence them. Geography held the power, men merely borrowed it for a time. Beyond deserts, the mountains stood as iron gates. The Pamirs, the roof of the world, lifted travelers into thin air where lungs faltered and snowstorms struck like ambushes. Armies stumbled, caravans froze, and only the hardiest beasts survived. In the Hindu Kush and Tian Shan ranges, passes were narrow as knives, where one misstep meant a fall into eternity. Yet these mountains, cruel as they were, also became guardians. They isolated cities into sanctuaries, giving rise to cultures that flourished precisely because they were difficult to reach. Geography both punished and preserved, offering survival to some while devouring others. Seas, too, commanded their toll. The Indian Ocean routes offered speed compared to land, but storms rose without warning, drowning fleets in hours. Monsoon winds dictated when ships could sail, as if the heavens themselves controlled commerce. Ports grew into cities of fortune. Calicut, Aden, Hormuz, each thriving on the obedience sailors gave to wind and wave. But dependence on sea routes was a gamble as precarious as desert or mountain. Geography allowed wealth, but always at a price, always with risk lurking beyond sight. Empires that forgot this truth soon learned it in wreckage scattered along their shores. Distance was not merely physical but psychological. To know that months of travel separated one market from another, that death lurked in every mile, shaped the very rhythm of trade. Merchants carried not only goods, but fear, and fear became part of the exchange. Tales of vanished caravans spread as warnings, but they also enhanced the allure of the road. Danger gave value, and distance gave meaning. To hold silk in Rome was to hold proof of triumph over unimaginable spans. Every luxury was a victory against space itself, and every coin carried the weight of distance conquered. Yet distance is undefeated. Empires rise believing they can bridge it forever, but the law of geography remains. Roads falter, seas shift, storms reclaim dominion. Even today, with steel rails and satellites, distance asserts itself in subtler forms. Pipelines stretch vulnerable across steppes. Shipping lanes can be blocked by a single strait. Cables hum fragile beneath the ocean. BRICS may believe technology has ended geography's tyranny, but the Earth remains patient. Distance is not abolished. It is transformed. Its shadow lengthens across every age, whispering the same truth. Geography is destiny, and destiny cannot be denied. Every empire has tried to tame distance, to hammer roads across deserts, to carve steps into mountains, to map seas with charts and stars. Yet distance remains undefeated. Rome paved its highways with stone, binding Italy to its provinces, but the farther its legions marched, the thinner their strength became. China extended the Great Wall, not to erase distance, but to acknowledge it, to mark the line where geography resisted conquest. Even when armies triumphed, the land demanded tribute: broken wagons, starved horses, exhausted men. No victory was ever complete. Distance collected its due, quietly and inevitably, as years passed. Caravans revealed this truth with every step. Men left their homes knowing they might never return, their lifetimes measured in journeys rather than seasons. They crossed valleys where silence was broken only by wind, plains where horizons refused to end, and passes where the cliffs themselves seemed to sneer. Each mile was earned, not given. Oases marked progress like rare stars on a dark sky, and merchants bowed to them with reverence, as if they were living gods. Distance humbled all who walked it, no matter their wealth. For no coin could shorten the span between here and there. This humility shaped cultures along the road. Towns became sanctuaries of survival, where strangers became kin through necessity. Hospitality was not courtesy but law, for to deny shelter in a land of distance was to condemn a traveler to death. In Samarkand, inns opened to the weary with bread and salt. In Kashgar, markets welcomed the foreign as if he were a brother. Geography imposed a morality of mercy, one that recognized the shared fragility of life stretched across endless miles. Distance, cruel though it was, also birthed compassion, a paradox that made the Silk Road as much a spiritual corridor as a commercial one. Yet compassion could not erase fear. Every merchant who set out knew that distance carried not only exhaustion, but exposure. A caravan was visible for miles, its line of camels an invitation to raiders watching from hills. The farther from home a trader wandered, the more vulnerable he became, his life tethered to unfamiliar lands. Even emperors felt this vulnerability. Rome feared the Germanic forests not only for the tribes within them, but for the endless miles that separated them from Rome's heart. China feared the steppes because distance there was limitless, horizons stretching into infinity, an enemy's home without boundaries. Geography was more than terrain, it was weapon. Sea routes carried their own weapons. Monsoons arrived with precision, a clock written in the sky, but to miss them was to risk ruin. Sailors who departed too late drifted into tempests, their ships torn apart before reaching port. Pirates preyed upon those who miscalculated, turning distance into ambush. Empires dreamed of controlling oceans, but oceans never yielded. They offered passage only on their own terms, forcing obedience to winds, currents, and tides. To sail was to submit, to admit that even the wealthiest merchant was at the mercy of invisible forces. Distance at sea was no less tyrannical than on land, merely cloaked in different dangers. Modern empires believe they have conquered this tyranny with technology. Airplanes shrink days to hours, satellites trace paths across the sky, and digital cables send messages in seconds. Yet distance has only changed its face. Now it appears in the fragility of shipping lanes, where a single blockade can choke global trade. It appears in the vulnerability of pipelines stretched across steppes, each one exposed to sabotage. It lurks in cables that lie silent on the ocean floor, threads as delicate as spider silk. Distance no longer announces itself with mountains or deserts. It hides in infrastructure, waiting for failure to reveal its dominance again. BRICS may believe itself beyond such fragility, building networks of rail and sea, forging alliances meant to secure supply. Yet the law remains. Distance cannot be abolished, only endured. Oil must still cross seas, minerals must still traverse continents, and ships must still obey storms. The tyranny persists, reminding new empires that ambition is measured not only in wealth or will, but in the miles that separate desire from fulfillment. Geography is not an obstacle that can be erased. It is destiny written into the earth itself. To forget this is to repeat the mistakes of Rome, of Byzantium, of countless caravans swallowed by silence. Distance does not merely test the body, it reshapes the soul. Merchants who walked for months across deserts or sailed for seasons upon seas returned changed, their faces weathered, their voices carrying echoes of other lands. They brought back not only silk or spice, but new tongues, new faiths, new doubts. Distance stripped them of certainty, teaching that the world was vaster and stranger than any one empire could claim. Each horizon conquered revealed another horizon beyond. Each step a reminder that the earth was endless. For rulers who dreamed of control, this was both revelation and curse. No road could ever truly be completed. No empire could ever command the whole. The Silk Road embodied this lesson in every caravan. Routes shifted with wars, with climate, with whim of rulers. What seemed fixed was only temporary, for distance demanded flexibility. A sandstorm could bury a trail, forcing men to carve new ones. A hostile tribe could close a pass, sending merchants through another valley. Even oceans shifted with storms, pushing ships hundreds of miles off course. Geography was never static. It was alive, breathing its will upon those who dared to cross it. To believe a road eternal was to misunderstand it. Roads live only as long as distance allows them to, and distance is always changing. This constant change bred resilience but also fragility. Cities rose quickly when distance favored them, their gates crowded with caravans. Yet the same cities could collapse just as swiftly when the road turned elsewhere. Prosperity proved a loan, not a gift, granted only while geography permitted. Merv, once a thriving center, fell into silence when trade routes shifted. Palmyra, jewel of the desert, became ruin when Rome withdrew its favor. Even Constantinople, proud at the crossroad of continents, eventually succumbed when new sea lanes circled Africa and distance reshaped the world. Geography lifts and geography destroys with impartial hand. The tyranny of distance also shaped war. Armies that marched too far stretched their supply lines until they broke. Soldiers grew weak not from battle, but from hunger, thirst, and exhaustion. Rome's legions faltered in Germania, not because of enemy strength alone, but because forests and rivers extended farther than their discipline could reach. China's armies on the steppe found themselves swallowed by horizons, their strength diluted by miles. Distance was the silent ally of nomads and rebels, who used its immensity as weapon. No throne, however mighty, could command beyond the limit of its breadth. Geography marked the edges of ambition, a line no ruler could cross unpunished. Modern nations too face this ancient restraint. Aircraft can cross oceans in hours, yet supply chains remain stretched across fragile arteries. A storm can still halt ships. A blockade can still starve markets. A single broken cable can silence entire economies. Distance has not vanished. It has transformed into interdependence. The farther wealth travels, the more vulnerable it becomes. BRICS, seeking to bind continents, discovers that every corridor of trade is also a corridor of exposure. Oil pipelines, shipping lanes, railways, each one a vein that can bleed. Distance asserts itself not through deserts now, but through fragility, through the inevitability of breakage. The road, then, is never truly mastered. It is borrowed, a fragile bridge stretched over distance. To walk it is to bargain with the earth, to beg for permission each mile. Empires forget this truth in their pride, yet the ruins scattered across deserts, mountains, and coasts remind us. Distance is eternal, ambition is not. The Silk Road whispers across time, geography is destiny. Rome ignored it and fell. Byzantium relied on it and fell. Palmyra, Samarkand, Merv, each rose in the mercy of distance and fell in its refusal. The law is unbroken, patient as stone, merciless as sand. Thus ends the third law, the tyranny of distance. Roads may stretch, empires may rise, ships may sail, satellites may orbit, yet distance remains sovereign. It bends ambition, it humbles pride, it commands without voice. To forget this is to walk into ruin, as countless empires already have. Geography is not obstacle but fate, etched into mountains, deserts, and seas. It is the first boundary and the final judge. Every empire walks as far as distance permits, and then no farther. In this, destiny is decided. Power has always been a performance. Thrones may be built of stone and armies clad in iron, but without spectacle they are fragile, as fleeting as sand in wind. Kings and emperors wore crowns not merely to rule, but to be seen ruling, to drape themselves in symbols that convinced their people of permanence. The Silk Road amplified this theater, carrying silks for robes, gems for crowns, incense for temples, and stories that magnified rulers into myths. Authority needed costume, stage, and audience. Without these masks, even the greatest empire was naked, its power exposed as mortal and uncertain. The Persians understood this truth well. Their kings called themselves King of Kings, sitting upon thrones raised high so that subjects must crane their necks to glimpse them. Reliefs at Persepolis carved this theater into stone, processions of tribute bearers approaching with gifts, their bodies bowed in reverence. The performance was not for foreign eyes alone, but for the empire itself, a reminder that hierarchy was eternal, that the king was a figure set apart. Yet beneath the robes and jewels lay a man as vulnerable as any other, his power sustained only as long as the performance convinced. Rome too mastered the art of masks. Its generals paraded through the streets in triumphs, their chariots rolling beneath laurel wreaths, captives trailing behind as living symbols of conquest. Senators wore togas bordered in purple, a dye so rare it was worth its weight in gold, marking them as separate from common citizens. Even statues served the theater, casting emperors in marble more perfect than flesh could ever be. To see Augustus sculpted as eternal youth was to believe his empire might share that eternity. Yet marble crumbles, dyes fade, and parades end. Rome's performance dazzled, but it could not disguise the decay beneath its surface forever. The Silk Road itself became a stage for imperial theater. Caravans arrived bearing silks embroidered with dragons for the Chinese court, jewels glittering for Indian maharajas, glass vessels for Persian palaces. These treasures were more than luxuries. They were props, proof that the ruler who possessed them commanded not only his people, but the very roads that spanned continents. A king draped in foreign silk proclaimed that his reach extended beyond horizons. A temple filled with incense from distant lands whispered that even the gods favored his dominion. The road made power visible, tangible, wearable, a mask woven from the wealth of worlds. Yet masks are fragile. They demand constant renewal, for once the performance falters, the illusion breaks. When caravans ceased, courts grew drab, their splendor diminished, their authority questioned. A king without silks looked less divine, a priest without incense less sacred. Power that depends on theater must forever feed its stage, or else the stage collapses. History shows again and again that when the supply of masks dwindles, revolts ignite, rivals advance, and thrones tumble. The Silk Road sustained empires not only with food and arms, but with spectacle. And when that spectacle dimmed, so too did authority. But spectacle is not falsehood alone. It shapes reality. People obey not only swords, but symbols, not only armies, but myths. The mask becomes the face when worn long enough. Rome's purple dye, Persia's reliefs, China's dragon robes. These were not lies, but truths shaped by performance. Empires survive when they understand this law and perish when they forget it. The Silk Road's endless traffic of symbols made this theater global, linking distant courts in a shared language of spectacle. Each ruler became both actor and audience, watching rivals adorn themselves while striving to outshine them in return. Theater of power thrives not only in palaces, but in markets, where the common eye beholds the majesty of rulers. The Silk Road delivered the costumes of empire into the hands of kings, but it also displayed them before merchants and travelers. To see a ruler robed in silk or crowned with gems was to witness wealth embodied. Authority became spectacle shared with the crowd, convincing the humble trader that the empire he served was vast, unshakable, and divinely favored. Yet this performance was double-edged. The more dazzling the display, the more fragile the reality it concealed. For masks must always hide something, and what they hide is often weakness. In China, the Tang dynasty perfected this performance. Its capital, Chang'an, was a theater unlike any other, its avenues broad and symmetrical, designed to proclaim cosmic order. Foreign envoys entered through gates that framed their submission. Processions of music and banners filled the streets with spectacle. Within the palace, Dragon robes shimmered with embroidery so intricate it seemed alive, proclaiming the emperor as the son of heaven. But every robe depended on weavers, every gem on merchants, every performance on the continuity of the road. When caravans faltered, so too did the stagecraft, and whispers of weakness echoed through the grand avenues. In India, courts of the Gupta and later the Mughal emperors relied upon similar masks. Thrones of gold, inlaid with gems from across the Silk Road, were more than seats of power. They were altars upon which the empire itself was sanctified. Audiences with the emperor became rituals where wealth spoke louder than words. The peacock throne, shimmering with diamonds and emeralds, proclaimed dominion over both earth and heaven. Yet even as rulers sat upon it, they knew that fortune's tide was fickle. When invaders pried those gems loose, the mask was torn away, and the empire's majesty was reduced to memory. Theatre sustained, but once broken, it exposed fragility with merciless clarity. Religion too became part of this stage. Incense from Arabia burned in temples, its smoke curling toward the heavens like a visible prayer. Statues of deities carved from ivory or gilded with foreign gold proclaimed that gods themselves adorned the empire. Pilgrims arriving in holy cities were struck not only by sanctity but by splendor, taught to believe that the divine favored those who ruled in such magnificence. Yet faith wrapped in wealth was vulnerable, for if offerings ceased or shrines dimmed, believers questioned whether the gods had turned their gaze elsewhere. The theater of religion was as dependent on the road as the theater of kingship. Even diplomacy wore its mask. Envoys carried gifts more symbolic than practical, each item chosen to project status. A jewel-encrusted sword spoke of martial might. A robe of foreign silk whispered of dominion over distant lands. A rare animal paraded through streets proclaimed mastery of nature itself. These spectacles impressed both friend and foe, weaving illusions of strength that sometimes prevented wars as surely as armies. But they also raised expectations impossible to sustain. When the performance faltered, when gifts dwindled or spectacles grew thin, rivals sensed opportunity. The mask that once prevented conflict could, when cracked, invite it. Theatre of power did not die with antiquity. It endures, reshaped for modern eyes. BRICS nations too stage their authority in summits adorned with banners, in ceremonies heavy with symbolism, in speeches choreographed for global audiences. The costumes are suits, the jewels are contracts, the processions are motorcades, yet the principle is unchanged. Power still depends on spectacle, on masks carefully maintained. Just as emperors once displayed silk to proclaim dominion, modern leaders display alliances and trade agreements. They too understand that theatre is never permanent. The mask must always be renewed, for once its luster fades, the illusion crumbles. History is filled with moments when grandeur faltered, when silks grew scarce, when gems were stolen, when incense no longer rose from temples. In those moments, the emperor's body, frail, aging mortal, was revealed beneath the costume of eternity. The people, once dazzled, saw not divinity but vulnerability. The very symbols that had sustained loyalty became reminders of absence. When the mask cracks, power does not fade gently. It collapses like a stage struck by sudden silence. Consider Byzantium, heir to Rome's legacy of theatre. For centuries it dazzled with processions in Hagia Sophia, with relics displayed as proof of divine favor, with robes woven from purple that only emperors could wear. Yet as wealth thinned, the ceremonies continued, hollower each year. Processions without splendor became parody, purple without depth became mockery. When Constantinople finally fell, its conquerors saw through the mask to the weakness beneath. The empire's theatre had grown more ornate even as its substance vanished, and the contradiction was unsustainable. Theatre must reflect strength to survive. When it reflects emptiness, it hastens the end. The Silk Road itself could betray the mask. When caravans ceased, when routes shifted, the supply of symbols dwindled. Palaces lost their silks, temples their incense, courts their jewels. Authority, once bright, grew dull. Rivals seized the moment, for they knew that the theatre of power was vulnerable to silence. The absence of spectacle was as visible as its presence, an emptiness louder than any trumpet. A throne stripped of symbols is no throne at all. It is merely a chair, and chairs are easily overturned. The road built the theatre, and when it faltered, the curtain fell. Yet it would be wrong to call spectacle mere illusion. Theatre shapes truth as much as it disguises it. A crown may be a mask, but it also becomes a reality in the minds of those who kneel before it. Authority exists because people believe in it, and belief is born from what they see. Myths carved in stone, silks shimmering in candlelight, jewels catching the sun. These are not lies, but forces that mold obedience. Theatre is fragile, yet without it, no empire endures. To rule is to act, and to act is to persuade. Even conquest requires costume. In our own age, the masks have changed, but the law remains. BRICS nations stage summits filled with flags, with speeches layered in symbolism, with rituals designed to project unity. Their masks are not silk robes, but statistics, not jeweled thrones, but contracts signed before cameras. Yet they too rely on theatre to sustain authority, both for their people and for the watching world. The risk is the same as in antiquity. If spectacle falters, if promises appear empty, if symbols lose their shine, the illusion breaks. And once the illusion breaks, rivals advance, and the curtain falls as surely as it did in Persepolis or Rome. Thus, the fourth law is revealed, the mask of empire. Power is theatre, and theatre is fragile. The road feeds the stage, but when its gifts falter, the stage collapses. Authority requires costume, performance, audience. Without them, it is naked, and nakedness is peril. History's ruins are littered with thrones that once glittered, palaces that once dazzled, temples that once glowed with incense. All have fallen, their masks broken, their theatres silent. Yet the law remains, eternal as the road itself. Empire is performance, and performance must always be renewed. Markets are the lungs of empire, breathing in wealth and exhaling power. Along the Silk Road, bazaars rose like living organisms, alive with noise, color, and scent. Spices perfumed the air, incense curled upward in blue smoke, and the clamor of bargaining rang like ritual chants. Yet beneath the shouting lay whispers, rumors carried by traders, secrets traded as freely as silk. A market was never merely a place of commerce, it was a theater of voices, where empires learned their fate long before armies brought it. Whispers shaped more destinies than decrees, for markets carried truths that palaces could not hear. Merchants became the hidden authors of empire's story. Unlike kings who ruled from thrones, these wanderers carried the pulse of distant lands in their hands and on their tongues. A Persian selling lapis might also recount tales of Roman wars. A Chinese silk trader might share news of Parthian alliances. Gossip traveled faster than caravans, weaving a net of information that bound continents together. Markets hummed with prophecy, not because merchants knew the future, but because they knew the present everywhere at once. To stand in a bazaar was to stand at the crossroads of the world's secrets, hearing the empire's pulse in 1,000 whispers. The power of markets was subtle but profound. They could topple rulers without lifting a sword. If traders lost faith in a city's safety, caravans diverted, wealth vanished, and with it the lifeblood of power. Palaces that once glittered fell silent when stalls closed, for rulers cannot eat jewels or drink silk. Markets punished arrogance, rewarding cities that offered trust and punishing those that betrayed it. A single rumor of plague could empty a city overnight, while a whisper of prosperity could turn a desert outpost into a jewel of the road. Empires believed armies sustained them, but in truth, it was the merchants' faith. The voices of markets also carried myth. A story told by a caravan guard in one city could reach another thousands of miles away, reshaped in each telling until it became legend. Tales of Alexander's conquests, of distant gods, of monstrous beasts traveled alongside goods, blending truth and imagination. These stories softened hearts to new faiths, prepared lands for new rulers, and bound strangers into communities of shared wonder. The Silk Road was as much a road of words as of wares, and its markets were the scriptoria where these words were exchanged. The whisper of a merchant could linger longer than the march of an army. Merchants themselves were often dismissed as lowly, seen as tools of kings or servants of wealth. Yet their influence was unmatched. They carried not only silk but survival, not only spices but diplomacy. A ruler could not know distant lands except through the lips of traders. Their voices shaped policies, their warnings steered armies, their whispers prevented disasters. They were the veins of the world, invisible yet essential, and without them, the heart of empire could not beat. Though uncelebrated in monuments, their voices echo in ruins more loudly than kings' decrees. For it was they who sustained the road, who gave it breath. The modern age has not silenced these whispers. BRICS nations gather not only wealth, but information, using markets as both barometers and weapons. Currencies rise and fall with rumors, oil prices shift with whispers of conflict, digital networks hum with secrets traded like spices once were. The bazaar has expanded. Its stalls now banks and exchanges, its merchants financiers and negotiators. Yet the principle endures. Whispers guide power. Markets shape fate. Just as in Samarkand or Palmyra, trust remains fragile and rumor remains sovereign. Empires still depend not on decrees alone, but on the unseen breath of their markets. Markets along the Silk Road were more than stalls beneath cloth awnings. They were labyrinths of sound and scent, orchestras of commerce conducted by the invisible hand of rumor. The fragrance of cinnamon mingled with the musk of camels, while shouts in Greek collided with murmurs in Sanskrit and Persian. Yet beneath this noise, softer voices carried more power than coins. A whispered warning about raiders could reroute a caravan. A quiet suggestion of a new route could birth a city. Markets were theaters where whispers were louder than drums, shaping the fate of nations without banners or swords. Merchants thrived on this hidden economy of words. To them, information was as precious as jade or gold. They traded news of harvests, the rise and fall of kings, the safety of roads and the whims of rulers. These exchanges were subtle, conducted over cups of tea or in the shadows of courtyards, but their effects rippled outward. A merchant who misread a rumor could lose his fortune. One who interpreted it wisely could shape the destiny of cities. Markets became forums of intelligence, where voices carried farther than any army's march. This invisible power frightened rulers. Kings demanded tribute and armies enforced taxes, yet they could not silence the markets without strangling themselves. Even emperors knew they relied on merchants' trust. If traders doubted the safety of a road, commerce ceased and the empire weakened. Thus, rulers courted merchants, lavishing them with privileges while fearing their whispers like curses. The paradox was eternal. Merchants were scorned as common, yet they held in their tongues the very threads of empire. A rumor of tyranny could depopulate a city. A whisper of generosity could attract caravans from continents away. Markets also preserved memory. Long before chronicles were inscribed, merchants told stories of battles, betrayals, and miracles. These stories traveled with goods, transformed by retelling into myths. One market might whisper of Alexander as a demigod, another of him as a destroyer. Legends of distant wonders, kingdoms of gold, rivers of jewels, lands where the sun never set, fed imaginations and inspired journeys. Markets thus became the womb of legend, birthing myths that shaped civilizations. Even when walls crumbled, their stories endured, carried on the breath of traders long after empires fell silent. The fragility of markets was part of their strength. A bazaar could vanish overnight if disease spread or war threatened, yet it could reappear with equal swiftness when peace returned. Unlike palaces of stone, markets were ephemeral, woven from trust, desire, and rumor. Their adaptability made them resilient, surviving where armies perished. Caravans followed not flags but voices, choosing paths where they believed safety and profit lay. In this way, merchants, though nameless and often forgotten, directed the flow of history. Empires crumbled but markets endured, shifting their stalls to safer ground, whispering into new ears, guiding new rulers. Today, echoes of these whispers still rule global trade. BRICS nations, like ancient empires, depend on markets to legitimize their power. Oil prices shift with murmured speculation, currencies rise and fall with hints of alliance or betrayal, and stock exchanges sway with rumors as volatile as desert winds. Modern markets may glow with digital screens, but their soul is unchanged. Whispers decide their rhythm. Empires still live and die not by armies alone, but by confidence and trust. The bazaar has no crown, no throne, yet its unseen voices remain stronger than kings. Markets were fragile kingdoms, ruled not by kings but by rumor. A murmur of war could silence a city's gates, transforming thriving plazas into echoing emptiness. Yet the same whispers could resurrect markets just as swiftly. A story of safety, of new prosperity, of generous rulers could draw traders like moths to flame. Unlike walls or armies, markets lived and died on trust alone. Their rulers were not crowned, but they wielded influence with every word they breathed. For merchants, survival meant mastering the language of these whispers. They knew when to speak and when to remain silent, when to share warnings and when to conceal them. Each rumor was weighed like a coin, its value judged by instinct and experience. A careless word could ruin fortunes. A well-placed hint could redirect trade across continents. Merchants became oracles of commerce, their tongues forging invisible maps of safety and risk. They lacked palaces or armies, yet their voices shaped the destinies of empires. Kings commanded with decrees, merchants commanded with whispers. The bazaar was also a school where wisdom was traded alongside goods. Merchants from distant lands gathered not only to sell but to listen, to learn of customs, of laws, of dangers. In the exchange of spices and silk came an exchange of philosophies, of tales that softened divisions between stranger and friend. The whisper of one culture became the song of another, reshaped in markets until it belonged to both. These exchanges laid the groundwork for tolerance and suspicion alike, for every whisper carried both hope and fear. In this way, markets were not only economic engines, but crucibles of civilization. Yet whispers could also kill. A false rumor of betrayal could collapse alliances, drive traders into exile, or bring armies marching. Markets were powerful precisely because they were fragile. The same tongues that built prosperity could summon ruin. This paradox gave them weight beyond coin. They were the most delicate yet decisive arenas of empire. No king could fully control them, for fear itself was their sovereign. Merchants understood this better than rulers, and so they navigated carefully, weaving prosperity from uncertainty, balancing always on the edge of silence and speech. In modern times, the whispers have only grown louder, carried not in bazaars alone but across networks and screens. Currencies tremble at speculation. Oil rises and falls on murmurs of conflict. Alliances form and fracture in the silence before an announcement. BRICS, like Rome and Han before it, finds its strength tethered to markets it cannot fully command. Its unity depends not only on armies or treaties, but on trust, on confidence, on whispers of stability. The merchants of today wear suits, not robes, yet they inherit the same law. Voices shape empires more profoundly than swords. Thus, the fifth law stands revealed, the whispering markets. Power lies not only in thrones or roads, but in voices exchanged quietly between stalls, between strangers, between allies and rivals alike. Empires rise when markets believe in them, and fall when whispers turn against them. The bazaar is eternal, its language unchanged across centuries. Trust, rumor, confidence, fear. To rule without heeding these voices is to build upon sand. For when the whispers shift, the empire's breath falters and silence follows. Collapse does not thunder in suddenly like a storm. It creeps quietly, like rot beneath painted beams, like cracks beneath gilded stone. Roads that once carried caravans of treasure begin to thin, their lanterns fewer, their markets hushed. Decay is rarely visible at first. A single caravanserai closes, a well runs dry, a stretch of road grows unsafe. Yet each silence gathers weight until the pulse of empire weakens. Collapse is not always war or conquest. Often it is the slow unraveling of the very arteries that sustained life. The road that once breathed becomes a husk, its whispers fading into dust. The Silk Road bore witness to this long decay. In times of plague, caravans vanished, not by sword but by fear. Merchants abandoned routes haunted by disease, leaving cities starved of trade. In times of corruption, Tolls grew heavier, officials enriched themselves and caravans sought safer passage elsewhere. When armies marched too often, raiding instead of protecting, the road withered. Like a body poisoned by its own blood, empires strangled their lifelines with greed and neglect. Roads rotted not from distance alone, but from human hands that forgot their purpose. Cities that had blossomed in prosperity shrank into shadows of themselves. Samarkand, jewel of the desert, grew quiet when Mongol invasions tore apart its markets. Palmyra, once radiant with colonnades, became a ruin after Rome's wrath extinguished its independence. Dunhuang's painted caves survived as ghosts of glory, while the caravans that once filled its gates dwindled into memory. Each silence was a warning written in stone. When the road falters, cities crumble, and when cities crumble, empires follow. The shadow of collapse falls first on the places most alive, for their dependence makes them most fragile. Merchants, once the road's lifeblood, became its mourners. They whispered of danger, of empty stalls, of kings demanding tribute, yet offering no protection. They rerouted their caravans, abandoning old cities for safer lands. Each decision was small, but together they reshaped destiny. Roads are not carved by emperors alone, they are written by footsteps, by choices of traders. And when footsteps cease, the road dies, no matter how grand the empire that claims it. Collapse begins with absence. Absence of trust, absence of safety, absence of faith in the path ahead. Even nature conspired in decay. Rivers shifted course, leaving ports stranded. Sand swallowed once thriving outposts, erasing them in a single season. Climate shifted, crops failed and famine followed, driving people away from markets that no longer fed them. Geography, once a reluctant ally, turned traitor, reclaiming its dominion. Where once the Silk Road seemed eternal, geography reminded men that all roads are temporary guests upon the earth. Collapse is not an event, but a process, as inevitable as erosion, as merciless as time. Empires may resist armies, but none resists silence. The modern world faces the same shadow. BRICS builds new corridors of trade, railways across steppes, pipelines beneath seas, digital veins of information, yet fragility remains. Corruption, rivalry, blockade or sabotage can rot these roads as surely as bandits once did. A single silence in markets, a single rupture in trust and arteries falter. Collapse will not arrive with trumpets, but with whispers, contracts unfulfilled, caravans delayed, partners estranged. The shadow waits, patient, ready to fall upon any road, ancient or modern, for no empire escapes the slow rot of neglect. Collapse often begins invisibly, like rot beneath gilded wood or dampness spreading through hidden beams. An empire may appear radiant, its markets full, its temples glowing, yet beneath the splendor lies fatigue. Officials enrich themselves at the expense of travelers, soldiers abandon posts, and wells once clear turn brackish. Merchants notice first, their instincts sharper than the decrees of kings. They hear that a pass is unsafe, that a tax has doubled, that a ruler has grown careless. Their whispers become warnings, and their absence becomes prophecy. For when merchants withdraw, collapse follows, silent but inevitable. The Mongol era revealed this paradox sharply. At first, their conquests terrorized the road, burning cities into ash and scattering caravans. Yet once their dominion stretched across continents, they secured the arteries with ruthless order. For a time, merchants praised the Pax Mongolica, when roads were safer than they had been in centuries. But when that order fractured, when rival khans fought for power, the silence returned. Roads once guarded became prey to warlords. Trade shrank, markets dimmed, and cities that had flourished collapsed into ruin. Collapse is cyclical. Even protectors become predators, and safety dissolves into fear. Plague also carried its shadow into the road. Caravans, once bearers of silks and spices, became carriers of death. The Black Death spread along the arteries of commerce, a whisper more devastating than any army's march. Cities once vibrant fell into stillness, their markets hushed by terror, their gates closed against strangers. The very road that had enriched them became their executioner. Collapse here was not conquest or neglect, but the inevitability of connection. Roads that bind also carry poison, and no empire can guard against an enemy that rides unseen in breath. Religion, too, could rot the road when zeal turned violent. Where once shrines welcomed travelers, fanaticism sometimes closed them. Pilgrims who had once been safe found themselves targets, and trust dissolved into suspicion. The road depended on tolerance, on the fragile recognition that strangers bore gifts, not threats. When this recognition broke, the arteries hardened, and life could not pass. Collapse is not always loud. Sometimes it is the quiet refusal to share bread, the turning away of a weary traveler, the extinguishing of a lantern in a caravanserai. Without trust, the road becomes wilderness again. Economies reflected this fragility with cruel speed. A ruler who demanded too much tribute strangled his own wealth. Merchants diverted elsewhere, and the once living city became ghost. Empty stalls stood like gravestones, their silence more damning than rebellion. Collapse is often self-inflicted, born of greed that forgets roads are lifelines, not treasuries. History shows that when rulers see the road as their possession, rather than a shared trust, the road rots. No decree can summon caravans once they are gone. Silence is final, and silence spreads. Modern corridors face the same danger in subtler forms. Corruption can turn rails into rust, ports into bottlenecks, alliances into resentments. Rivalries can twist trust into suspicion, making partners retreat into isolation. Cyber attacks, sanctions, or blockades can wither arteries as effectively as plague or desert. The names change, but the law does not. Neglect, greed, and fear rot roads faster than swords. BRICS dreams of building arteries strong enough to outlast collapse, but strength is fragile if trust decays. Collapse does not always need enemies. Sometimes it is born from within. Collapse carries a strange silence, one that grows heavier than war. A city once filled with shouts of merchants becomes an echoing hollow, its stalls empty, its streets deserted. The silence is not sudden, it arrives in stages, creeping like twilight across stone. First the caravans grow fewer, then the inns close, then the gates remain shut even at midday. The people within sense it before rulers do. Prosperity has fled. Some leave in search of safer roads, while others linger, hoping the caravans return. But silence does not return to life once it has taken root. It deepens, and with it the shadow grows. Collapse is also revealed in ruins reclaimed by nature. Sand buries Palmyra's colonnades, turning grandeur into ghost. Grass covers Roman roads once thought eternal, reducing triumph to pathway for sheep. Riverbeds shift, stranding once mighty ports, their harbors silted into marshes. The earth is patient, erasing with time what men believed indestructible. Where there were domes and statues, there remain only fragments, stones with no voice but the whisper of wind. In ruins, the arrogance of empire is humbled, revealed as fragile as clay. Roads rot, and with them the cities that trusted too deeply in their permanence. The whispers of merchants often became the last eulogies of such places. They spoke of markets gone quiet, of wells gone dry, of rulers blind to decline. Their warnings were carried to distant lands, where new centers rose as old ones fell. In this way, collapse of one road gave birth to another, for trade cannot die, it only shifts. Yet for those left behind, the shift felt like betrayal, as if the world itself had abandoned them. Collapse is never merely economic, it is emotional, spiritual, the despair of watching one's home fade into irrelevance. Roads rot, and with them hearts break. Armies rarely needed to destroy such weakened places. When invaders came, they found gates unguarded, markets already hushed, walls unmanned. Collapse had hollowed the core long before swords arrived. The Mongols, the Turks, the Crusaders, often they conquered cities that had already begun to decay. Victory was swift because the road had already failed. The empire's arteries had rotted, leaving only a husk to be claimed. In this sense, every conqueror is late, arriving not at the peak of glory, but at its corpse. Roads kill their empires before enemies do. Modern corridors face collapse in quieter forms. A digital network may fall silent with a single breach, cutting off trade that relies on invisible threads. A port may rot not by fire, but by neglect, its docks rusting while rivals build newer harbors. An alliance may collapse with the whisper of distrust, partners withdrawing caravans of cooperation. The signs are subtle, yet the outcome is the same. Arteries falter, silence spreads, and the shadow of collapse falls. BRICS dreams of immunity, yet no empire has proven immune. The law waits, patient, until their roads too show cracks. Thus, the sixth law is revealed, the shadow of collapse. Roads rot when neglected, when corrupted, when trust dissolves. Collapse arrives not only by sword but by silence, not only by enemy but by decay within. Every empire believes its arteries eternal, yet history whispers otherwise. Palmyra, Samarkand, Byzantium, each trusted too much in roads that could not endure. The law is cruel but true: when roads rot, empires die, and the shadow waits not in thunder, but in silence, ready to fall again. Empires breathe as living beings do. They inhale when they expand, drawing in new lands, new wealth, new voices. They exhale when they falter, when resources thin, when strength is scattered too widely. This rhythm is as natural as a heartbeat, as inevitable as dawn. Expansion feels eternal while it lasts, but each inhalation carries a cost. The lungs of empire are not infinite. The greater the breath, the sharper the exhaustion that follows. Roads may stretch farther, armies may march longer, but the body of empire weakens with each step beyond its natural reach. The Silk Road both enabled and demanded this breath. Wealth beckoned empires outward, urging them to seize distant trade routes and fertile lands. Rome pushed eastward for silk, Persia westward for influence, China outward to secure its fragile frontiers. Each expansion filled coffers, fed armies, built monuments. Yet each also demanded tribute. More soldiers, more taxes, more food for mouths stretched across impossible distances. The road gave riches, but whispered exhaustion into every gain. To walk farther was to breathe deeper, and to breathe deeper was to edge closer to collapse. The Romans knew both triumph and weariness in their march. Their legions paved roads across continents, extending the empire's breadth farther than any before. Yet even as marble cities gleamed, exhaustion grew. Garrisons far from Rome consumed wealth faster than they produced it. Armies blared in forests and deserts where no tribute could repay their sacrifice. The empire inhaled beyond its strength, and each exhale became heavier. At last, Rome collapsed not because its legions lacked courage, but because its breath had grown too long, its chest too weary to rise again. China's dynasties echoed this rhythm. The Han, reaching outward to secure horses and trade, extended their armies across deserts and steppes. For a time, their expansion seemed unstoppable, their breadth vast as the horizon. Yet deserts consumed supplies, soldiers weakened, and the cost of maintaining distant fortresses drained the core. Later dynasties repeated the cycle, each believing they could outlast the exhaustion of their predecessors. Yet the law was unyielding. Expansion feeds glory, but ensures fatigue. Dynasties that inhaled too deeply collapsed beneath the weight of their own breath. Even the Mongols, whose empire seemed boundless, felt the truth of exhaustion. Their riders galloped across Eurasia, their breath fierce and wide. For a generation they seemed immortal, their empire stretching farther than any before. Yet even they could not sustain such reach. The vastness they created fractured under its own weight, their energy spent, their unity dissolved. They had inhaled more than any people in history, and their exhale broke the world they built. Expansion's triumph became exhaustion's ruin, as it always does. Today, BRICS too breathes in ambition. Its members reach outward for influence, for resources, for markets. Their corridors stretch across continents. Their alliances inhale distant wealth. Yet the law waits. Expansion fills treasuries, but it drains energy. Each new corridor requires protection. Each new alliance demands maintenance. The breath of empire feels eternal in its rising, but the lungs are finite. Exhaustion is already written in the act of expansion. The question is not if it comes, but when. Expansion seduces with the illusion of strength. Each new conquest, each new alliance, feels like proof of permanence. Rulers drape themselves in maps, colored wider than before, and subjects believe they are part of something eternal. But the Silk Road revealed the hidden cost of this illusion. Every new city to defend, Every new pass to guard, every new frontier to feed, became another stone upon the empire's chest. What appears as breath is also weight, and weight presses until the lungs of empire strain. The farther an empire stretches, the more fragile its core becomes, drained by its own ambition. Rome offers perhaps the clearest example. At its height, it encircled the Mediterranean, extended deep into the Near East and stood at the gates of Persia. Its legions marched along roads that seemed unending, roads that once promised eternal dominion. Yet with every step outward, its heartbeat grew weaker. Rebellions flared in distant provinces, draining soldiers. Armies stationed along distant walls consumed resources that Rome could no longer spare. When Goths and Vandals pressed at its borders, the empire had no breath left to resist. Its lungs had filled too deeply. Exhalation was inevitable. Expansion was triumph, but exhaustion was death. The Silk Road magnified this cycle. Wealth beckoned empires outward, urging them to chase caravans, to seize markets, to tax merchants. Yet, with every grasp, the burden grew. Persia fought endless wars to control Mesopotamia, the fragile link between East and West. Byzantium strained to hold Anatolia and the Levant, its armies stretched thin, its treasuries bleeding. Even China, mighty in its heartlands, found itself weakened by fortresses built across deserts where no crop could grow. The road tempted empires to inhale beyond their capacity, and each who yielded to its temptation discovered the weight of exhaustion waiting in silence. Exhaustion is not only material but spiritual. Soldiers marched until their bodies failed, but people too grew weary of endless tribute, endless wars, endless demands. Farmers fled their fields, merchants diverted to safer lands. Citizens doubted rulers who promised glory but delivered fatigue. An empire may crumble not because enemies are strong, but because its own people no longer believe. This weariness is subtle, creeping like dusk. It begins with discontent in whispers, grows into reluctance in tribute, and ends in rebellion or surrender. Exhaustion is empire's slow suffocation, invisible yet relentless. Even the Mongols, whose riders seemed tireless, discovered this truth. Their empire expanded with the speed of breath itself, conquering lands faster than maps could record them. But maintaining such vastness proved impossible. Communication broke, rival khans quarreled, and the empire split into fragments. Their breath had been too great, their lungs too small. Expansion gave them glory, but exhaustion dissolved their unity. No empire, however fierce, can inhale forever. To grow is natural, but to rest is necessary, and empires rarely rest until it is too late. Today, BRICS finds itself at this threshold. Its members reach outward for resources, for allies, for dominance. Their projects are vast, railways across continents, pipelines beneath oceans, digital corridors binding markets. Expansion fills their lungs, but already exhaustion whispers at the edges. Rivalries simmer within the alliance, costs mount for projects unfinished, debts tighten like bands around the chest. BRICS believes it can grow endlessly, yet the law endures. Expansion is breath, but breath cannot last forever. One day the exhale will come, and with it, the truth of exhaustion. The final symptom of exhaustion is not always defeat in battle. Often it is retreat into silence. An empire gasps not with war cries, but with the hush of empty fields, abandoned markets, and borders no longer patrolled. The breath falters first at the edges, where garrisons weaken and roads grow unsafe. Then it creeps inward, reaching the heart, until even the capital feels the air grow thin. History shows that collapse is rarely sudden. It arrives as breath too labored to sustain life, as lungs stretched beyond their strength, as a body struggling to exhale what it once inhaled so greedily. The Silk Road's history is littered with such exhalations. Cities that once thrived on caravans found themselves deserted. Their prosperity shifted elsewhere. Routes diverted around decaying centers, leaving them to wither like leaves in autumn. Rome exhaled when it abandoned its distant provinces, its empire shrinking before vanishing altogether. The Tang dynasty exhaled when frontier wars drained its vitality, leaving it fractured and vulnerable. Byzantium exhaled when its markets were outcompeted by new sea routes, its arteries failing to deliver life. Expansion gave them breath, but exhaustion commanded the release, and the release was ruin. Merchants sensed exhaustion long before rulers admitted it. They noticed when markets grew smaller, when coins lost value, when rulers taxed too heavily out of desperation. They whispered that the empire's lungs were failing, and they shifted their caravans to safer, fresher routes. In this way, trade became a physician diagnosing the empire's illness. Caravans withdrew not out of malice, but out of instinct, and their absence sealed the empire's fate. For no empire, however glorious, can breathe without merchants to carry its lifeblood. Expansion may belong to rulers, but survival belongs to markets, and markets abandon exhaustion. Exhaustion is also revealed in culture. Once vibrant arts grow heavy with repetition, repeating old forms rather than creating new. Literature turns nostalgic, longing for past glories. Architecture shrinks as resources dwindle, monuments giving way to fortresses of necessity. An empire's creativity falters when breath runs low. This decline is as telling as military defeat. The Silk Road carried not only goods, but ideas, and when those ideas grew stale, it signaled that exhaustion had hollowed the empire's spirit. Roads reflect the vitality of those who walk them, and when footsteps slow, silence soon follows. The law of empire's breath is cruel but constant. Expansion brings glory, but exhaustion ensures collapse. Empires rarely recognize the moment when breath shifts from strength to strain. They mistake the weight of conquest for the lightness of triumph, and by the time they realize the cost, their lungs are already failing. The Silk Road bears witness. Rome, Persia, Han, Byzantium, Mongol, all inhaled deeply, and all exhaled their greatness into dust. No empire escaped the rhythm, for no empire can breathe forever. Today, BRICS inhales, its lungs filled with projects, alliances, and dreams of dominion. But already the signs of exhaustion glimmer at the edges. Rivalries within, debts that tighten, overreach disguised as ambition. Expansion feels eternal, yet history whispers otherwise. The day will come when breath must be released, and the exhale will reveal how much strength remains. The law waits patient, unbending. Every empire breathes and every empire exhales. Expansion feeds glory, but exhaustion writes the end. Tribute is the hidden spine of empire. Beneath the silk of kings, beneath the marble of cities, beneath the gilded stage of power, lie the taxes, levies, and offerings that sustain them. Roads do not build themselves. Armies do not march on air. Palaces do not rise from dust without hands forced to labor. Tribute is the weight carried by those unseen. Farmers in distant valleys, herders in forgotten plains, merchants bent double under tariffs. Every empire breathes because someone somewhere pays. The Silk Road shimmered with wealth, but behind its brilliance stood the burden of tribute. For Rome, tribute flowed in coin, grain, and bodies. Provinces fed the empire's hunger, their harvests taken to fill granaries of the capital, their sons conscripted into legions. Tribute was called duty, loyalty, even honor. But for the conquered, it was chains of obligation. The Silk Road's luxuries reached senators draped in silk, yet the cost was borne by farmers toiling in fields far from its markets. Empire clothed itself in splendor, but its garments were woven from sweat and sacrifice. Tribute was the unseen hand that kept the stage lit and the armies fed. In China, dynasties transformed tribute into ritual. Neighboring states were drawn into a theater where they bowed, offered gifts, and acknowledged the emperor as the son of heaven. These offerings often returned multiplied, but the principle was clear: recognition of subordination. Tribute was both material and symbolic, a declaration that one's fate was tied to the empire's will. Yet even within China, peasants bore tribute through labor, grain, and taxes. Their toil funded armies to guard the Silk Road. Their backs carried the burden of roads that stretched into deserts. Tribute bound not only subjects but rulers, who relied on its endless flow to project divine power. The markets themselves were arenas of tribute. Merchants paid tolls at city gates, bribes at checkpoints, levies to rulers who promised safety. Each coin handed over became part of the invisible tax that sustained empires, yet tribute bred resentment. A merchant taxed too heavily diverted his caravan. A city that demanded too much was bypassed. Tribute could enrich, but it could also strangle. The balance was delicate, for without enough tribute, armies faltered, but with too much, merchants abandoned the road. Collapse often began not with invasion, but with tribute stretched too far, crushing those who carried its weight. The burden of tribute was not only economic but human. Families torn apart to provide soldiers, villages emptied by famine as grain was seized, artisans forced to labor on monuments they would never enjoy. Tribute was sacrifice demanded in silence. The empire did not ask whether its people could bear the weight. It assumed endurance until endurance snapped. Rebellions were born not only of injustice but of exhaustion when the weight became unbearable. The Silk Road was paved not only with goods, but with the invisible bones of those who paid for its splendor. Today, tribute wears new disguises. BRICS seeks independence from older powers, yet its members demand contributions from their people to build vast projects to fund railways, pipelines, and summits. Debt becomes a form of tribute, binding nations to obligations that weigh upon future generations. Citizens pay through labor, taxes, and silence, sustaining ambitions that stretch beyond their reach. The question remains unchanged: who pays the price? For every corridor built, someone bears the burden, and history whispers that the weight of tribute always grows heavier until it breaks the back of empire. Tribute is always demanded in the name of order. Kings declare it necessary for security. Priests call it sacred offering. Generals frame it as duty to the state. Yet for those who pay, the reasons are less important than the hunger it creates. A farmer who surrenders grain for an empire's granaries must watch his children eat less. A merchant who pays tolls at every gate loses profit before reaching market. Tribute concentrates wealth at the center, while the edges grow lean. This imbalance breeds unrest, for those who bear the burden seldom share the splendor it funds. The Silk Road revealed this paradox with clarity. While nobles in Rome draped themselves in silk, peasants at the edges of the empire labored under heavy taxation. In Persia, satraps extracted tribute from distant provinces, sending streams of wealth toward the royal capital while local villages withered. Even in China, where tribute rituals dazzled with gifts exchanged, the core of payment fell on commoners who tilled the soil. Tribute flowed upward, rarely downward. The weight was uneven, and uneven weight cracks structures no matter how splendid their surface. Religious institutions often reinforced this weight. Temples demanded offerings, framing them as devotion to the gods. Pilgrims brought incense, gold, and livestock, which priests redistributed to rulers or stored as sacred wealth. Religion masked tribute as piety, transforming burden into ritual. Yet the people felt the cost all the same, for the gods did not feed their hunger. The shrines glittered while villages starved, and resentment simmered beneath the incense smoke. When famine struck, offerings still flowed to temples, deepening the sense that tribute was less holy than parasitic. The divine mask made tribute no lighter to those who carried it. Tribute also reshaped diplomacy. Vassal states along the Silk Road often sent precious goods, horses, jade, slaves, not as gifts freely given, but as payments demanded for survival. Empires called these offerings gestures of loyalty, yet they were chains disguised as gestures. Small kingdoms paid tribute to avoid invasion, their independence swallowed gradually. The performance of kneeling envoys was as much a tax as the grain taken from peasants. Tribute demanded submission, and submission left scars. It preserved peace for a time, but bred bitterness that endured for generations, erupting when empires weakened. The weight of tribute was psychological as much as material. To live beneath constant demand is to live in fear, to measure each harvest not by survival, but by how much must be surrendered. Families carried memories of loss, stories of ancestors broken beneath levees. These memories passed down, becoming seeds of rebellion. Tribute may hold empire together in its strength, but it also ensures its destruction in its weakness. When people grow weary enough, they cease to fear armies, for hunger leaves nothing left to lose. Tribute is thus both pillar and poison, sustaining until it corrodes. Modern nations echo this ancient law in quieter forms. Taxes, debts, and tariffs still weigh upon the many to feed the ambitions of the few. BRICS gathers its projects through collective contribution, but beneath the language of partnership lies the same old burden: Citizens labor for promises of future prosperity, yet daily sacrifices remind them of present costs. Debt owed to banks becomes a modern tribute, binding nations in chains of obligation. Just as along the Silk Road, the wealth of corridors is measured not by those who walk them, but by those who fund them unseen. Tribute has not vanished. It has simply changed its name. The heaviest cost of tribute was rarely measured in gold or grain. It was measured in lives lived under shadow, in spirits bent by endless demands. Families surrendered sons to armies, daughters to labor, futures to debts that could never be repaid. Tribute hollowed households quietly, leaving shells of endurance where joy once lived. Empires praised themselves for their order, for their roads, for their monuments. Yet the foundation of this glory was laid upon backs bowed beneath invisible stones. Tribute did not break suddenly. It eroded steadily like water carving rock until people became strangers to their own freedom. This erosion gave birth to rebellion. When tribute pressed too hard, farmers rose with tools as weapons, merchants withheld their caravans, soldiers deserted their posts. Revolt was often less about ambition than exhaustion, the refusal to bear more weight. History remembers great uprisings as clashes of ideology, but beneath them lies the simple truth of tribute. Men will endure poverty, but not endless tribute. They will accept hardship, but not hopelessness. Empires that demanded too much discovered their subjects could break chains with fire and fury, even if only for a season. Tribute thus contained within it the seeds of empire's undoing. The Silk Road bore witness to such unrest. Dynasties in China faced peasant uprisings when taxes drained villages dry. Rome trembled as provinces resisted tribute, their rebellions bleeding legions already stretched thin. Persia and Byzantium alike saw provinces turn traitor, preferring the rule of invaders to the endless burden of tribute. Conquerors often promised lighter levies, and weary people welcomed them, trading one ruler for another in hopes of relief. Tribute betrayed empires by weakening loyalty, ensuring that when rivals knocked, gates opened willingly. Roads rotted not from neglect alone, but from hearts unwilling to pay their price. Even religion, which once cloaked tribute in sanctity, could not save empires from this revolt. When offerings became unbearable, faith turned to bitterness. Gods once praised were blamed for indifference, temples looted, idols cast down. Tribute, too heavy, broke not only bonds of loyalty but bonds of belief. Collapse followed, as roads emptied and markets closed, their silence echoing louder than prayer. The divine mask could not hide the human truth. Tribute demands always more until nothing remains to give, and when nothing remains, empires fall, no matter their grandeur. In the modern world, tribute still endures, though in subtler forms. Nations bound by debt surrender autonomy, piece by piece. Citizens pay through taxes that fund projects whose benefits they may never touch. BRICS, like empires before it, dreams of prosperity but demands sacrifices today. Pipelines, banks, and summits are built upon unseen tribute, extracted in work and silence. The old law remains: wealth for the few is carried by the many. Tribute may appear as progress, but its weight is ancient and its breaking point inevitable. Thus the eighth law stands revealed, the weight of tribute. Roads, empires, and markets all rest upon it. Tribute sustains, but tribute also destroys. It enriches capitals while draining villages, strengthens rulers while weakening peoples. The Silk Road teaches that glory is never free. It is always purchased, and the cost is borne by those least able to pay. Modern corridors may glitter, but their shadows are filled with the same burden. Tribute waits, heavy, eternal, until its weight breaks the back of empire. Borders are the scars of empire. Lines drawn not by rivers or mountains alone, but by the clash of ambition. Along the Silk Road, they burned like wounds that never healed. Each frontier was both gate and battlefield, a place where caravans crossed under watchful eyes and armies clashed over tolls. To trade was to gamble with politics, for every step meant entering someone's claim. Borders promised safety to some, but to others they promised fire. They were not barriers alone, they were furnaces where wealth and war melted into one. The deserts of Central Asia revealed this paradox most clearly. Caravans moved from oasis to oasis, but each oasis was guarded by rulers who demanded tribute, loyalty, or silence. When diplomacy failed, borders erupted. Fortresses rose upon dunes, their towers signaling both welcome and threat. A caravan that entered the wrong territory risked plunder or death, its goods swallowed by rulers who saw wealth as spoils of sovereignty. Borders became traps disguised as thresholds, their flames consuming traders who misstepped. The Silk Road shimmered with promise, but its edges always burned. Rome and Parthia, two giants of antiquity, contested these borders endlessly. Between them lay Mesopotamia, fertile and fragile, the artery through which wealth and power pulsed. Each empire sought to control it. Each saw it as both shield and prize. Armies marched, cities were razed, and yet the borders never settled. Caravans crept through cautiously, their profits weighed against the cost of war. These traders became unwilling witnesses to empires tearing at each other's throats, their own survival dependent on reading the shifting fire. The road carried not only silk and spices, but ashes of burning cities. China too faced border flames. The Great Wall was less protection than acknowledgement of constant conflict. Beyond it lay nomadic tribes who raided and retreated, their mastery of distance undoing China's fortresses. Dynasties sought to buy peace with tribute, but when tribute failed, war consumed the steppes. Caravans trembled under these conditions, for they depended on borders being porous enough for trade, but secure enough for safety. Too rigid, and commerce faltered. Too weak, and raids flourished. Balance was fragile, and the fires of borders made it nearly impossible to maintain. The Silk Road thrived only when borders cooled, when truces were forged, when rulers recognized that wealth gained through trade outweighed spoils of war. Yet such peace was fleeting. The fire always returned, ignited by greed, revenge, or desperation. Markets depended on peace, but peace depended on restraint, and restraint was scarce. Borders burned again and again, and each burning scarred the road. The merchants who survived carried not only goods, but memories of fire, their whispers telling tales of towns consumed and partners lost. War along the road was not exception, but rhythm, the fire beating in time with empire's pulse. Borders along the Silk Road were never still. A truce one season dissolved the next, and a route deemed safe in spring might burn by autumn. Merchants learned to read not only the stars, but the tempers of rulers. They listened for whispers of shifting alliances, of khans who quarreled, of governors replaced, of tribute demanded in new coin. A border was not a line, but a mood, fragile as wind. To cross it was to enter theater where soldiers were both actors and executioners. Caravans survived by intuition, weighing profit against the heat of possible flames. The wars between Byzantium and Persia illustrate this cycle. Their borders, stretching through Anatolia and Mesopotamia, became crucibles where empires poured wealth and blood without cease. Fortresses rose and fell, towns were seized and abandoned, fields turned to ash. Merchants who braved the frontier paid tolls to both sides, never knowing which army might claim their goods as spoils. The road narrowed under this fire, yet it endured, for even war could not quench the hunger for silk and gold. Still, every border war carved deeper scars, leaving fields barren and cities hollow long after treaties cooled the ashes. For nomads of the steppe, borders were invitations, not barriers. Their raids swept into sedentary lands with sudden force, striking caravans and outposts before melting back into horizon. Empires built walls, but walls only marked the line where fear began. Nomads understood that borders were illusions. The true power lay in movement. They lit the fires of war wherever empires stretched thin, proving again that distance was weapon. For merchants, these raids were constant reminders that wealth was tinder, and that every border carried sparks waiting to ignite. Religion, too, stoked border flames. Pilgrims carried their faiths across roads, but zealots sometimes turned shrines into fortresses and altars into banners of war. Disputes over sacred places, over relics, over divine right inflamed lands already tense with ambition. Caravans passing through found themselves entangled in conflicts they did not choose, their goods seized in the name of gods. Borders became not only political, but spiritual furnaces, where belief sharpened into blade. The Silk Road's promise of unity often withered at these thresholds, consumed by rival visions of heaven. Modern echoes of these border fires are not absent. Nations still clash where trade arteries intersect. Sanctions replace swords. Blockades replace fortresses. Yet the principle is the same. Borders ignite when wealth passes through them. BRICS seeks to calm these thresholds with treaties and alliances, but rivalry simmers beneath the surface. Pipelines, ports, and railways all cross contested spaces, and each crossing is a spark. As in antiquity, borders remain both gateways and furnaces. The fire has not vanished, it has only changed its fuel. The fires of borders rarely ended with victory. More often they ended with exhaustion. Cities burned, fields blackened, caravans diverted, and yet the lines themselves remained unsettled. War along the road was a ritual of repetition, each generation relighting the same flames. The merchants who endured learned that no empire truly owned its borders. At best, rulers borrowed them, holding the fires at bay for a season before rivals struck again. Borders were less lines of control than scars of conflict, reopened whenever ambition or desperation demanded. The Silk Road endured, but it carried the memory of smoke in every mile. For those who lived along the thresholds, life was forged in uncertainty. Farmers planted knowing armies might trample their fields. Innkeepers welcomed caravans with fear, for soldiers could seize their stores at any moment. Children grew up hearing drums of war more often than songs of peace. These borderlands became both wealthiest and most fragile, prospering from traffic, yet perishing from flames. Their resilience was remarkable, but their suffering immense. They bore the price of empire's hunger for dominance, serving as shields behind which capitals prospered. The fire consumed them first, leaving their ashes to warn or enrich those who followed. Merchants too adapted in their own way. Some traveled with armed escorts, turning trade into miniature armies. Others shifted routes entirely, abandoning burning frontiers for safer, though longer, paths. Their choices shaped history, for when caravans moved, prosperity shifted with them. Empires discovered too late that control of borders mattered less than the merchant's trust. A ruler could claim victory, but if caravans refused to cross, the triumph rang hollow. Thus, even amid fire, the whispers of markets carried more weight than banners of conquest. The road bent not to swords, but to survival. The law of borders haunted empires until their last breaths. Rome drained itself, defending endless frontiers, the fire consuming its soldiers faster than it could recruit them. Byzantium fought ceaselessly at its gates, until the gates themselves gave way. China built walls across thousands of miles, but the very act admitted its fear of border flames. No empire extinguished the fire permanently. At best, they smothered it for a time, only for it to flare anew. Borders promised permanence, but they delivered only struggle, a rhythm as old as empire itself. Modern corridors repeat this pattern. Oil pipelines crossing contested lands invite sabotage. Trade routes through disputed seas spark confrontations. Sanctions and tariffs become new forms of fire, burning silently yet destructively. BRICS, like Rome and Persia before it, must contend with borders that ignite where ambition meets rivalry. Treaties may cool the flames temporarily, but fire waits beneath the ash. Every crossing is a risk, every alliance a fragile truce. The Silk Road whispers across time. Borders are never settled, only smoldering. Thus, the ninth law is revealed: the fire of borders. Roads promise unity, but borders promise conflict. To walk the road is to pass through fire, sometimes unseen, sometimes all-consuming. Empires may dream of peace, but borders burn eternally, their flames fed by ambition, by fear, by hunger for wealth. The road endures, yet it is never free of fire. To trade is to gamble with sparks, and to rule is to live beside flames. The fire of borders does not vanish. It waits ready to rise again with every empire that dares to walk the road. Not all rulers wear crowns, and not all power sits upon thrones. Along the Silk Road, empires glittered with marble halls and jeweled robes, yet behind the spectacle moved shadows, unseen forces that shaped destiny more surely than kings. Merchants' guilds whispered in caravans, secret financiers decided whether roads thrived or rotted, and hidden networks of smugglers carried as much influence as governors. The road belonged not only to emperors, but to those who mastered its secrets. Shadow and light walked together, and often the shadow steered the course. The power of secrecy lay in invisibility. Armies could be counted, palaces seen, but shadow forces thrived in silence. Wealth concealed in vaults, alliances spoken only in whispers, debts recorded in secret tablets. These shaped the road more than decrees carved in stone. A single wealthy merchant could fund caravans that rivaled armies in scale. A guild unseen by the masses could dictate prices that toppled kingdoms. Shadows needed no banners. Their weapon was knowledge, their shield silence. Power in the open was vulnerable. Power in shadow was eternal. Spies flourished where shadows ruled. Along the Silk Road, emissaries doubled as informants, merchants carried more than goods, and priests whispered secrets alongside prayers. Information traveled swifter than caravans, reshaping policies, triggering wars, averting disasters. Rulers trusted spies because they had no choice, yet feared them for the same reason. Every market was also a listening post, every inn a chamber of secrets. Shadows thrived in these corners, crafting maps of influence invisible to the eye. Empires that believed themselves secure discovered too late that shadows had already undermined their walls. Religious orders also cloaked themselves in shadow. Monks carried scriptures that spread faith, but also intelligence about distant lands. Sufi orders moved quietly across borders, linking communities more deeply than armies. The power of such groups was subtle but immense. They knit together hearts across continents, creating loyalties beyond politics. To rulers, they were allies or threats depending on obedience. To people, they were bridges of trust in uncertain lands. In the theater of empire, these quiet figures shaped destinies behind veils of devotion. Shadows do not always destroy. Sometimes they preserve. The Silk Road's greatest merchants themselves became shadows. They lacked thrones, but their gold-funded armies, their caravans sustained cities, their debts bound rulers. A king might order armies, but if merchants withdrew credit, those armies withered. Wealth hidden in ledgers outweighed treasure displayed in palaces. The shadow of finance reached farther than banners, and though invisible, it endured. Merchants mastered this law, ensuring that even in collapse, their influence survived. While cities burned, their networks shifted quietly, preparing for the next road to rise. Modern echoes of these shadows persist. BRICS speaks of nations and treaties, yet behind them move bankers, energy cartels, digital networks, and clandestine actors who shape outcomes unseen. Currencies are manipulated in silence. Resources are redirected without fanfare. Just as the Silk Road was steered by shadows, so too are today's corridors of trade. The law endures. What is unseen often governs what is seen. Empires project light, but shadows write their fate. Shadows thrive where the eye grows weary. Kings watched borders, generals counted soldiers, but the true architects of empire labored in silence. Caravan guilds met in hidden chambers, deciding which roads would prosper and which would wither. Bankers loaned to rulers discreetly, binding thrones with chains of debt invisible to subjects. Even in times of peace, these networks stirred the road's destiny. Their strength lay not in spectacle, but in obscurity, for what cannot be seen cannot be resisted. To walk the Silk Road was to step into a labyrinth of influences, most unseen, all decisive. The Han dynasty relied not only on armies but on alliances with shadow brokers among the steppe tribes. These men negotiated marriages, tributes, and hidden payments that kept borders quiet for a time. Yet their loyalties were fluid, their whispers shifting with the winds. The fate of dynasties often turned on such invisible bargains. Armies could fight for years and win little, while a single clandestine agreement bought peace for decades. Shadows knew that silence could achieve what swords could not, and rulers who ignored this truth paid dearly. Persia, too, wove shadows into its power. Satraps, governors of distant provinces, collected tribute and reported loyally to the king, or so it seemed. In truth, many formed hidden networks, skimming wealth, building local loyalties, and whispering to foreign envoys. Their duplicity was shadow power at its sharpest, weakening the empire from within while sustaining its appearance from without. Traders and priests in their courts carried messages to rivals, ensuring that even as palaces glittered, shadows decided the balance. Collapse often began in these corners, invisible until the throne itself cracked. Merchants wielded shadow power most naturally, for they moved freely where armies could not. Their letters of credit replaced heavy chests of coins, binding cities through paper unseen by common eyes. A single merchant family, trusted across generations, could move more wealth than an army could plunder. Their influence spread through silence, through ledgers guarded as sacred texts. When markets faltered, these families shifted their webs, abandoning failing cities for rising ones. Rulers fought to control roads, but merchants controlled the lifeblood flowing through them. Their shadows endured, even as thrones fell to dust. The role of secrecy shaped religion as well. Mystical sects thrived in hidden lodges, their rituals veiled from outsiders, their influence stretching across lands. Sufi brotherhoods carried both faith and fellowship across borders, offering networks of trust more resilient than armies. Monks bearing scriptures also bore intelligence, mapping distant lands with precision rivaling any spy. These spiritual shadows offered comfort to merchants and travelers, yet they also wove allegiances beyond rulers' reach. A whispered prayer in a monastery could link kingdoms more surely than treaties signed in gold. Shadows of faith could not be erased, for they belong to the human need for meaning as much as to the hunger for survival. Modern corridors of commerce reveal the same law. Behind the treaties of BRICS stand bankers who decide credit lines, cartels who determine resource flow, hackers who slip unseen into digital veins. What the world sees are summits and speeches. What it does not see are negotiations in back rooms, algorithms guiding markets, clandestine exchanges shaping decisions. Power wears masks of transparency, but beneath them, shadows remain sovereign. Just as in antiquity the law endures, the hidden hand writes destiny, while the open hand distracts with spectacle. Shadows reveal themselves most clearly in collapse. When empires stumble, the invisible hands that once sustained them step into the light. Bankers withdraw credit, merchants reroute caravans, priests withdraw blessing, guilds abandon promises. The throne may fall to a sword, but its weakness was written long before in ledgers and whispers. History records kings and conquerors, but the shadows write endings. Their silence signals decay, their absence unravels armies. Collapse, though blamed on battles, is usually born of shadows retreating. The story of Byzantium reflects this truth. While emperors staged ceremonies in Hagia Sophia, merchants in Genoa and Venice wielded shadow power that reshaped the empire's fate. Their fleets and finances dictated survival more than imperial decrees. Byzantium endured for centuries, not by strength alone, but by playing in the shadows of rival powers. When those alliances failed, when debts grew unbearable, the mask crumbled. The city fell not only to cannon, but to the weight of invisible obligations accumulated over generations. The shadows had decided before the walls collapsed. Merchants of Central Asia understood this law as well. Families like the Sogdians thrived in obscurity, speaking many tongues, weaving invisible webs of trust across empires. Their names seldom appear in chronicles, yet their signatures on contracts bound kingdoms more tightly than any treaty. They endured dynasty after dynasty, surviving even when armies erased cities. For shadows are not tied to walls or crowns. They flow with currents, shifting quietly while thrones fall loudly. Their resilience is proof that the unseen governs survival more than the visible. Faith too often endured in shadow. While empires fought wars and borders shifted, pilgrim networks kept shrines alive, monks preserved manuscripts, and brotherhoods sustained loyalty beyond politics. These hidden continuities meant that when empires collapsed, communities survived. The road may have burned, but the shadows carried embers into the future. Power shouted in palaces but whispered in monasteries. When shouts faded, whispers remained, keeping memory alive. Thus, shadows were not always destructive. They were preservers of continuity, guardians of what spectacle could not protect. Modern parallels are unmistakable. Behind BRICS' summits lie networks of financiers, energy brokers, and digital architects who shape decisions unseen. Leaders speak before cameras, but their policies are already written in the shadows of negotiation. Hackers slip into systems as silently as spies once entered caravanserais. Banks pull strings invisible to the public eye. Cartels maneuver in darkness, shifting wealth like caravans once shifted silk. The stage of power shines with light, but its script is composed in shadow. To ignore this law is to mistake costume for substance. Thus, the 10th law stands revealed, the law of shadows. True power is not always visible, nor does it need to be. Empires glitter in light, but their destinies are shaped by whispers, debts, alliances, and secrets that move unseen. The Silk Road teaches that shadows are eternal companions of roads, always present, always decisive. Today's empires, like those of the past, perform for the crowd, but shadows direct the play. The lesson is merciless and eternal. What is unseen commands what is seen, and in the end, it is the shadows that endure. Alliances glitter like mirrors, reflecting strength greater than any one power possesses. To stand beside another empire is to appear doubled, magnified, immortal. Yet mirrors deceive. They show unity where fractures remain hidden. They reflect loyalty where rivalry simmers. Along the Silk Road, treaties were written in gold and sealed in ritual, but beneath the surface lay suspicion. Alliances endure only so long as they serve advantage. When advantage fades, the glass shatters. The pact of mirrors is fragile, dazzling in its brilliance, yet treacherous in its illusion. Rome and Parthia played this game often. Their borderlands saw both swords and scrolls, truces made when exhaustion silenced war. Envoys carried gifts, spoke of peace, and staged performances of respect. Yet neither trusted the other, and each alliance was a pause, not a bond. Merchants who traveled through these regions knew the truth. Peace was temporary, a reflection meant to deceive until the next war. The road endured between them, but it carried more anxiety than assurance. Their alliances were mirrors, bright, brittle, and always at risk of breaking. China's dynasties too mastered the art of mirrored pacts. Neighboring states bowed in tribute, their envoys laden with gifts, proclaiming loyalty to the Son of Heaven. Yet behind these rituals, rulers maneuvered for advantage, sending offerings not from devotion but necessity. China returned lavish gifts, reinforcing the illusion of harmony. But harmony was fragile, for beneath the silk and ceremony lay coercion. These tributary alliances shimmered in ritual but fractured the moment power shifted. They reflected supremacy but concealed dependence, making them masks as much as mirrors. Merchants caught between these illusions relied on instinct more than treaties. They knew that the ink of diplomacy faded quickly, that caravans were safer when guarded by coin and caution rather than royal promises. They whispered warnings in markets, which alliances were real, which were facades. For the Silk Road taught them that peace proclaimed in palaces did not always reach the desert. A treaty might open a gate one year and close it the next, leaving traders stranded. To them, alliances were not protection but weather, changing, unpredictable, deceptive. The fragility of alliances lay in their selfishness. Rulers joined not out of loyalty, but out of need. When the need vanished, so did the bond. History is filled with betrayals, born from shifting advantage. Allies in one war became enemies in the next, their treaties forgotten as quickly as they were written. The mirror shattered, leaving shards sharp enough to wound those who once gazed into it with trust. Along the Silk Road, these betrayals left scars in cities and scars in memory, proving that alliances are not anchors, but illusions. Modern powers walk the same stage. BRICS speaks of unity, of shared destiny, of collective strength. Yet within its circle, rivalries simmer, disputes over resources, competition for dominance, mistrust of each other's ambitions. Their pacts are mirrors reflecting solidarity, but behind them lies fragility. The illusion dazzles for now, but mirrors crack under weight. History whispers that alliances endure only as long as need demands, and when the need changes, so too will the loyalty. The pact of mirrors waits to shatter, as it always has. Alliances along the Silk Road often sparkled brightest when empires were weakest. Rulers turned to neighbors, not from strength, but from desperation, seeking reflection of power they no longer possessed. A caravan guard watching envoys exchange gifts knew the truth. Behind smiles lingered fear, Behind oaths lingered doubt. The pact was less a bond than a mask, meant to project stability outward while concealing fragility within. Like a mirror catching torchlight in a dark hall, alliances glowed brightly but briefly, fading once the flame that fed them dimmed. Consider Byzantium, forever balanced between East and West. Its emperors courted both Persia and distant steppe tribes, weaving alliances with one hand while preparing defenses with the other. Treaties promised trade and security, yet armies remained poised along borders. Merchants carried goods under banners of truce, but they traveled cautiously, aware that a single insult could break the illusion. For Byzantium knew what all empires learn: allies are partners only until ambition shifts. Its history became a cycle of mirrored promises and mirrored betrayals, dazzling in ceremony but hollow in substance. Nomadic confederations understood this theater even better. Khans forged alliances with settled states, offering horses and warriors in exchange for tribute or goods. These pacts appeared strong, but they were mirrors reflecting convenience, not loyalty. When tribute faltered, raids resumed. When another empire offered more, alliances shifted overnight. Settled rulers called nomads treacherous, but the truth was simpler. Nomads saw alliances as reflections, useful but not binding. For them, survival lay in flexibility, not fidelity. Their mirrors were always polished, but never permanent, showing empires what they wished to see until the moment of shattering. Merchants watched these performances with weary wisdom. They traded wherever profit allowed, caring little for proclamations of friendship or enmity. To them, alliances were weather, favorable when calm, treacherous when stormy but never reliable. A treaty might open one route, while betrayal closed another, and so merchants shifted, following survival rather than illusion. In this way, the true continuity of the Silk Road lay not in alliances of kings, but in the pragmatism of traders. Their whispers exposed illusions, reminding rulers that mirrors, however dazzling, could never carry the weight of trust. Religious alliances too reflected fragility. Faiths united empires for a time, binding rulers under banners of shared devotion. Yet even these bonds fractured when ambition intervened. Pilgrims were welcomed one year and taxed the next. Holy cities became contested prizes, their sanctity drowned in politics. Shrines became bargaining chips, their sanctity no stronger than treaties. Alliances built on faith reflected hope, but mirrors cracked when tested by hunger for dominance. Even gods invoked in diplomacy were made to serve as actors in the theater of illusion. Modern powers repeat this play with different costumes. Summits end with handshakes, cameras capture unity, declarations proclaim eternal solidarity. Yet behind the stage, rivalries persist, ambitions clash, distrust festers. BRICS is no exception. Its mirrors reflect strength to the world, but fractures run beneath the surface. Nations compete for resources, for leadership, for influence, even as they proclaim unity. The illusion holds for now, dazzling in its brightness, but like every alliance before it, it is glass under pressure. And glass breaks not with warning but with sudden shatter. The shattering of alliances is often more destructive than open war. Betrayal wounds deeper than defeat, for it reveals that trust itself was illusion. Along the Silk Road, rulers who relied too heavily on allies discovered this truth with agony. One season they shared feasts and oaths. The next, their allies rode with enemies, banners changed, promises forgotten. Cities that trusted in alliances fell quickly, their gates opened by those once sworn to defend them. Mirrors reflect beauty, but when they break, they leave only shards sharp enough to draw blood. The Crusades illustrate this law with cruel clarity. Alliances shifted endlessly. Christian princes turned against one another. Muslim leaders quarreled even as they faced invasion. And mercenaries sold their loyalty to the highest bidder. Each side sought unity, but found only mirrors, bright for a moment, shattered soon after. The road became battlefield and marketplace at once, trade mingling with treachery. Merchants learned that neutrality was safer than allegiance, for allegiance could vanish overnight. The Silk Road survived because it belonged to no single alliance, only to the persistence of need. Merchants themselves sometimes played the mirror game, forging partnerships across rival powers. A trader might fund caravans that supplied both enemies, profiting from war while pretending loyalty to each. Their duplicity mirrored the duplicity of kings, proving that survival often required illusion. Yet even their mirrors could not endure forever. When suspicion grew too sharp, merchants were exiled, their fortunes seized. Alliances of profit dissolved as quickly as alliances of thrones. Mirrors served survival, but never permanence. The fragility of alliances rests in the heart of human ambition. Unity demands sacrifice, yet rulers rarely surrender ambition willingly. Each alliance conceals rival hungers, each truce veils unfinished war. The Silk Road carried countless examples, from Parthian-Roman treaties to Chinese tributary pacts, all shimmering in splendor before collapsing in conflict. History whispers the same refrain: alliances endure only while they serve advantage. When they cease to serve, they end, not gradually, but with fracture sudden and merciless. Modern alliances are no stronger. BRICS displays unity in declarations and summits, but within, rivalries endure. Economic needs diverge, territorial disputes persist, ambitions for leadership conflict. Their pact reflects solidarity, yet it is a mirror, dazzling but brittle. It may endure a season, even a generation, but it will shatter when the balance shifts. Just as the Silk Road's empires discovered, alliances cannot escape the law of illusion. Trust built on convenience breaks, and when it breaks, the fire spreads swiftly. Thus the 11th law stands revealed, the pact of mirrors. Alliances dazzle, but they deceive. They reflect strength, but conceal fragility. They promise eternity, but contain betrayal. The Silk Road teaches that unity proclaimed is rarely unity lived, and that mirrors, however polished, always crack under pressure. Empires may gather allies, but their reflections cannot save them. In the end, alliances are glass, beautiful, brittle, and destined to break. Hunger is the oldest law, older than roads, older than crowns, older even than memory. It beats within the body of every man and the body of every empire. Crops fail, rivers shift, mines empty, and hunger rises like a drum in the dark, summoning armies as surely as any decree. Along the Silk Road, hunger shaped history more than ambition, for no empire can dream of glory when its people starve. Resources are the breath of empire. When they thin, rulers grow desperate, and desperation sharpens into war. Grain was the first and fiercest of these hungers. Rome's survival depended on grain from Egypt and North Africa, its granaries filling the bellies of its restless citizens. When supply faltered, riots flared, emperors trembled, and armies marched to secure the harvest. The Silk Road carried luxuries, but without bread, luxuries turned to dust. Hunger made emperors weak, for the people feared famine more than foreign enemies. Thus, securing resources was not choice, but necessity, and necessity turned borders into battlegrounds. Hunger struck the drum and armies moved to its rhythm. Salt, too, carried power. This simple mineral preserved food, sustained life, and became wealth in itself. Salt caravans crossed deserts with as much significance as silk, for without salt, armies could not march and cities could not endure. Wars erupted over its control, alliances formed around its supply. Merchants who carried salt wielded influence beyond their station, for hunger listened not to thrones but to necessity. Salt, invisible in palaces, determined who feasted and who fell. In its grains lay both survival and strife. Water shaped destiny just as ruthlessly. Cities rose where rivers flowed and collapsed where rivers failed. Along the Silk Road, oases were more precious than gold. Each one fought over like a jewel. Control of water meant control of life itself. Armies clashed at wells. Dynasties collapsed when rivers shifted their beds. Hunger for water was eternal, and it bred both innovation and destruction. Canals and aqueducts extended survival, yet they also became targets, shattered in war to starve cities into submission. Water's absence was the most merciless hunger, one no empire could conquer. Hunger for resources extended beyond necessity into desire. Spices, silks, and gems were not vital for survival, yet empires treated them as though they were. Luxury became hunger disguised, turning desire into demand. Wars fought for these treasures masqueraded as strategy, yet beneath the rhetoric lay appetite. for wealth, for splendor, for prestige. Hunger does not always mean famine. It often means insatiability. Empires grew addicted to the shimmer of silk, the fire of spice and the shine of gold. And when supply faltered, their hunger roared into war. Modern echoes of this law are clear. BRICS nations hunger for oil, gas, minerals and grain, their ambitions clothed in policy but driven by necessity. Pipelines and ports are arteries no less vital than ancient wells or fields. When supply falters, prices surge, alliances strain and threats emerge. Hunger beats its drum still, summoning armies not always of men but of sanctions, tariffs and cyber attacks. The stage has changed, but the rhythm remains. Hunger rules and its law is merciless. The Silk Road carried luxuries, but beneath its shimmer lay deeper hungers. Empires did not march solely for silk or gems, they marched for soil, water, and sustenance. Steppe tribes raided not out of malice, but because their herds demanded pasture. Farmers rebelled not from ideology, but because their grain was seized to feed distant capitals. Hunger is relentless, a rhythm that cannot be silenced by decree. When the stomach growls, thrones tremble, and armies that once fought for glory turn to fighting simply to survive. Rome's history offers a clear parable. Its legions marched across continents, but always their supply lines led back to grain. Ships from Egypt became as vital as swords. When pirates disrupted the seas, Rome treated them as existential threat. For a city unfed could not worship, could not labor, could not obey. Bread was the foundation of empire's theater. The roar of the Colosseum depended on the quiet hum of mills grinding grain. Without wheat, marble palaces were empty shells. Rome's wars, beneath all rhetoric of conquest, often echoed the drumbeat of hunger. In China, dynasties felt the same rhythm. Floods or droughts along the Yellow River brought famine that toppled governments. When harvests failed, peasants rose in rebellion, their desperation transforming into fury. Armies built to defend borders were redirected to suppress starving subjects. The road carried silks outward, but hunger hollowed the empire within. The mandate of heaven, that sacred justification for rule, was judged less by victory in war than by ability to feed the people. When emperors failed to silence hunger, their dynasties ended. Even steppe nomads, who seemed unbound by agriculture, were slaves to hunger's law. Their herds needed grass and water, and when pastures withered, riders moved outward, pressing against settled lands. Empires saw invasion, nomads saw survival. Hunger transformed migration into war, necessity into conquest. Settled kingdoms fortified their borders, but walls could not repel famine. The Great Wall itself was a monument to hunger, built because herds beyond it demanded what fields within it provided. Hunger pressed outward, and war answered. Markets magnified this hunger. A shortage in one land rippled outward through caravans. Prices soared, merchants hoarded, and tensions sharpened. A rumor of famine in one valley could trigger riots in another city hundreds of miles away. Hunger's voice traveled faster than caravans, its whispers turning into panic before supplies truly failed. Thus, the Silk Road was not merely a conduit of luxury, but a nervous system of necessity, carrying signals of scarcity that shook empires. Hunger was not contained by borders, it was contagion. Modern corridors echo the same fragility. Nations today may cloak their conflicts in rhetoric of sovereignty, security, or strategy, but beneath lies hunger. BRICS nations compete for oil fields, mineral veins, fertile soils, and water rights. Pipelines and shipping lanes become battlefields not because of ideology, but because of necessity. Sanctions that block grain exports rattle governments as surely as sieges once did. Hunger beats its drums still, summoning wars fought in boardrooms, in ports, in deserts, and in seas. The weapons change, but the law is unchanged. Hunger is the first and final enemy. Hunger rarely announces itself with fanfare. It begins as a murmur in empty stomachs, as whispers in villages where granaries stand bare. Yet once awakened, its force grows unstoppable. Peasants who endured taxes without revolt will rise when their children starve. Soldiers loyal to thrones will desert when rations run dry. Hunger strips away illusions of loyalty, revealing the primal law, survival above all. The Silk Road shimmered with luxuries, but when famine struck, no silk or spice could silence the drumbeat of need. Hunger commanded, and empires obeyed. The fall of dynasties often followed this rhythm. In late Rome, bread riots shook the very capital, the mob demanding food with a ferocity no emperor could ignore. Grain shortages revealed weakness more swiftly than enemy swords. In China, famine sparked uprisings that toppled dynasties, the people declaring that heaven had withdrawn its mandate. Along the steppe, hunger drove migrations that reshaped continents, as tribes pressed into fertile lands when their own failed. History does not merely suggest, but declares, hunger is more powerful than crowns, for crowns cannot feed. Hunger also sharpened ambition. Rulers who saw scarcity looming often chose war as remedy, striking outward to seize resources before their rivals. Armies became harvesters with swords, cutting down not only foes but crops. Villages were raised not out of cruelty alone, but to claim granaries, to deny food to enemies. Hunger wrote strategy as much as generals did. Every campaign carried echoes of famine. Every treaty carried hidden calculations of supply. The drumbeat of hunger set the rhythm, steady, merciless, inescapable. Merchants bore witness to this law. Caravans diverted not by choice but by necessity, following routes where food was secure. Markets collapsed when famine spread, their silence echoing louder than temples. Traders learned that luxury was worthless without bread, that gems could not be eaten, that silk could not be boiled into sustenance. They became carriers of rumor, spreading news of scarcity across continents, accelerating unrest before armies arrived. Hunger turned markets into barometers of survival, their prices whispering truths empires tried to hide. Modern nations still march to this ancient drum. Oil shortages spark crises, droughts ignite unrest, grain exports weaponize hunger on a global scale. BRICS, like Rome and Han before it, competes to secure lifelines of food, water, and energy. Agreements framed as diplomacy conceal urgency. Who will feed their people? Who will keep lights burning? Who will silence unrest before it grows into revolt? The weapons may be sanctions, pipelines, or cyber warfare, but the rhythm is unchanged. Hunger remains the hidden drummer, guiding the steps of armies and the words of leaders. Thus the 12th law stands revealed, the law of hunger. Resources are not luxuries, but lifeblood, and their absence summons war as surely as any trumpet. Hunger beats its drums within every empire, unseen yet irresistible. The Silk Road teaches that famine, scarcity, and desire shape history more than conquest or ideology. Modern corridors echo the same truth. To ignore hunger is to invite collapse. To weaponize it is to gamble with fire. Empires may believe they rule, but hunger rules first. Hunger rules last. Silence is more terrifying than war. War is loud, filled with drums, banners, and shouts. Silence comes softly, without trumpet or warning, settling like dust upon deserted streets. Along the Silk Road, silence was the truest sign of collapse. A caravanserai with its lanterns unlit, a market with its stalls closed, a gate that did not open at dawn. These spoke more clearly of death than a battlefield strewn with corpses. Roads do not die in flames alone. They die when footsteps cease, when wheels no longer groan, when voices no longer echo through their stones. The fall of silence was gradual, creeping like twilight. First, caravans grew fewer, their bells rarer in the night. Merchants whispered of danger, of plague, of rulers too greedy. Cities once vibrant with music and bargaining dimmed into uneasy quiet. Inns stood half empty, their fires burning low. A traveler might pass a stretch of road and find it deserted, the emptiness pressing heavier than armies. Silence spread not by conquest, but by absence, a void consuming slowly, until even memory struggled to recall the noise that once filled it. Samarkand, Palmyra, and countless unnamed outposts bore this fate. Prosperous in one century, forgotten in the next, their decline marked less by fire than by silence. The desert crept in, filling streets with sand. Winds howled where merchants once bargained. Temples lost their worshippers, their gods abandoned. Silence replaced ritual, replaced laughter, replaced life. Travelers who stumbled upon these ruins felt unease greater than fear, for silence reminded them of their own fragility. Roads promised connection, but silence revealed impermanence. To walk upon an empty road was to glimpse mortality itself. Merchants dreaded silence more than raids. Bandits could be bargained with, armies could be avoided, taxes could be paid, but silence meant no trade, no survival. Without markets, caravans had no destination. Without caravans, cities lost their lifeblood. Silence spread like plague, not by killing directly, but by erasing purpose. A road without voices was a corpse, and those who depended on it withered in its stillness. For empires built upon connection, silence was a death sentence whispered without words. Even nature conspired in silence. A river shifting course left ports stranded, their docks rotting in solitude. A drought emptied oases, leaving only dust where caravans once refreshed. Mountains shifted, blocking passes with landslides. Silence did not always follow war. Often it followed indifference, neglect, or the slow, patient reclamation of the earth. In this way, silence was eternal, for nature always waits to reclaim what men abandon. Roads may glitter with commerce for centuries, but silence is patient, and patience always triumphs. Modern corridors, too, fear silence. Ports fall quiet when ships refuse to dock. Railways rust when cargo no longer comes. Digital cables hum useless when trust collapses. Sanctions, blockades, or crises spread silence faster than swords. BRICS dreams of roads alive with commerce, but silence waits, ready to remind them of the law. For silence is not absence alone, it is judgment. It asks, who will walk these roads? Who will keep their lights burning? And when no answer comes, silence falls, and with it, the end of empire's dream. Silence rarely falls all at once. It begins as hesitation. A merchant delays departure. A caravan leaves half its wagons behind. A city closes its gates at dusk instead of midnight. These small acts accumulate until the rhythm of the road falters. Once bells rang through deserts, and voices filled the air like birdsong. Now the spaces between sounds grow wider, and travelers feel unease in the gaps. Silence spreads invisibly, as if the road itself inhales and forgets to exhale. The pause becomes absence, and absence becomes final. The Black Death turned silence into empire's shadow. Caravans that once carried silks began carrying contagion, and cities closed their gates in desperation. Fear was louder than trade. Markets emptied, inns shuttered, and the roads lay bare. Entire stretches of the Silk Road became haunted, their stones untrodden for years. Silence was not just absence, but warning. The air itself was poison. Survivors described towns where grass grew in streets, where dogs roamed without masters, where bells tolled only for the dead. The road had not been destroyed by sword or flame, but by stillness so total it felt supernatural. Silence also followed conquest. When Mongol armies advanced, villages emptied before them, markets fled, and caravans rerouted in fear. Even after the empire established order, the memory of silence lingered. Traders hesitated to return, fearing the flames could reignite. This delay, this hesitation, was itself a form of silence, a gap between destruction and renewal. Roads can recover from fire, but silence is harder to erase. Fear lives longer than smoke, and whispers of danger continue long after banners change. Silence clings to memory, shaping choices for generations. Religion, once the road's unifying song, could not always shield against silence. Shrines fell empty when pilgrims no longer traveled, their lamps extinguished, their priests left to mutter prayers to absent crowds. Sacred cities that once thrived on the flow of visitors found themselves isolated, their sanctity diminished by quiet. The faithful still prayed, but without the hum of travel, even devotion dimmed. Silence in holy places felt heavier than silence in markets, for it seemed to question heaven itself. If gods allowed the roads to go dark, what light could mortals keep alive? Merchants who returned to once busy outposts described them like tombs. Caravanserais stood intact yet abandoned, wells filled with stagnant water, graffiti fading on the walls. They were monuments to absence, reminders that prosperity is not guaranteed. Such ruins spoke louder than chronicles. The road could vanish, not in conquest, but in disuse. And when the road fell silent, the empires that depended on it soon followed. The arteries of commerce are also arteries of survival. When they close, the heart stops beating. Silence does not merely reflect death, it delivers it. Modern roads risk the same silence in subtler forms. Ports close when sanctions isolate them. Digital networks falter when trust breaks, and entire corridors darken when war blocks passage. Silence arrives more swiftly now, but its effect is unchanged. Once trade ceases, collapse follows. BRICS envisions corridors alive with exchange, yet silence waits, patient, in every delay, in every failed treaty, in every rivalry. The law holds firm, roads are mortal, silence eternal. And when silence falls, it speaks more loudly than war, declaring the end of connection. Silence is not only the absence of sound, it is the erasure of memory. A road abandoned long enough ceases to exist in maps, then in stories, then even in imagination. Villages forget the caravans that once arrived, children grow without hearing the bells of camels, and ruins sink into sand until they seem never to have been. The fall of silence is thus more complete than conquest. Armies may burn cities, but survivors rebuild. Silence leaves nothing to rebuild, only emptiness where memory itself has died. The Silk Road carried countless such voids. Some cities, once radiant with life, left no trace but shards of pottery or faint walls beneath dunes. Scholars uncover them centuries later and marvel at their sudden disappearance. Yet to those who lived nearby, silence was explanation enough. The road shifted, and with it the lifeblood drained away. No chronicles were needed, for silence was louder than words. The desert remembered better than men, keeping secrets buried beneath its endless hush. Merchants learned to recognize silence as warning. A deserted inn, an empty market, a shrine without candles, each signaled that something had gone wrong. Their decisions, made in whispers, determined which cities would survive and which would fade. Silence was contagious. Once traders abandoned a path, others followed, fearing danger or futility. Thus silence spread faster than war, suffocating entire regions without a single clash of armies. It was the most merciless conqueror, for it killed not with swords but with absence. In time, silence became prophecy. To walk through abandoned ruins was to glimpse the future of all empires. Rome, Han, Persia, Byzantium, each believed their roads eternal, yet silence claimed them all. The echoes of marketplaces became wind, the voices of priests became dust. Travelers whispered that no empire escapes silence, for silence is the earth reclaiming its breath. Roads are temporary inscriptions upon the land. Silence is the land's reply, and the land always answers last. Modern corridors too will face this prophecy. A port closed by blockade, a railway unused, a digital cable severed, silence returns swiftly in new forms. No explosion announces it, no trumpet marks its coming. It arrives quietly, like nightfall, until once busy arteries grow dark. BRICS builds with confidence, yet its roads too depend on fragile trust, on endless motion. Should the caravans, ships, planes, or signals cease, silence will fall again as it always does. The road's fate is never to last, its destiny is silence. Thus the 13th law is revealed. The fall of silence. Roads go dark, not with fire, but with absence, not with conquest, but with forgetting. Silence is empire's true grave, deeper than ruins, colder than ashes. The Silk Road teaches that connection lives only while voices pass through it. When voices cease, nothing remains. Empires dream of eternity, but silence dreams longer, and silence always wins. History is a wheel, turning slowly, grinding centuries into dust, yet always returning to the same shapes. The Silk Road seemed unique in its time, yet its rhythm had echoed long before. In the spice routes of Arabia, in the Nile's grain flows, in the caravans of Mesopotamia. Each age believes itself new, yet each repeats the same hunger for trade, the same struggle for control, the same rise and collapse. The wheel turns, and though empires change, the road remains, shifting its face, but not its essence. It is the same road forever, wearing new masks with each age. Rome's desire for silk was mirrored centuries later by Europe's hunger for spice. Byzantium's role as crossroads returned in Venice's dominance of Mediterranean trade. Mongol riders echo in modern shipping fleets, relentless in speed and scale. What changes are costumes: camel for ship, parchment for cable, tribute for debt. But beneath the costume lies the same pulse, the endless hunger to connect, to control, to consume. Empires may declare novelty, but the road mocks them, for it has seen their likeness countless times before. Merchants felt this wheel more keenly than kings. A trader in Samarkand might hear tales of ancient caravans that walked the same paths, his own steps falling upon footprints long erased. To him the road was eternal, and his role fleeting. He sold silk as others had sold lapis, as others would sell porcelain, as others now sell oil. His wares changed, but his burden was the same: to gamble with distance, to risk for reward, to walk the wheel's circle. Merchants knew what rulers forgot: that history does not progress, it repeats. The wheel also turned in collapse. Palmyra's silence echoed in the fall of Merv, which in turn foreshadowed the decline of countless ports in later centuries. Roads thrive, then wither, then return elsewhere, like rivers shifting course. When one artery rots, another opens, and trade resumes along a new path. The wheel guarantees not stability, but repetition. Cities bloom, cities fall, but the wheel ensures that others will rise to take their place. The road does not die, it only moves its center. Its circle is eternal, written in sand, stone, and memory. Modern corridors are bound by the same wheel. BRICS forges new routes, declaring the birth of an order unlike any before. Yet their ambition echoes the Silk Road, echoes Venice, echoes the British Empire's trade lanes. Their ships carry containers, but the wheel recognizes them as caravans. Their summits proclaim destiny, but the wheel whispers inevitability. What has come before will come again. The road is the same, only disguised. The wheel of return turns slowly, patiently, forever. The wheel of history turns with deceptive slowness. To those living within an empire's height, the moment feels eternal. The roads bustling, the markets overflowing, the palaces glittering with permanence. Yet the wheel is already moving, already bending toward repetition. The Roman obsession with silk echoed the Persian desire for Mesopotamia centuries before, just as Europe's colonial hunger later mirrored Rome's weakness for luxuries. The faces on thrones change, but the gestures remain the same: grasping, demanding, expanding, collapsing. Each empire calls itself unique, yet each is but another, spoke upon the same wheel. The Mongols believed their empire was beyond comparison. Swift as storm, vast as sky, they seemed to break the pattern of past dynasties. Yet their empire fractured within a century, repeating the exhaustion of Rome and Han alike. The wheel turned, and their triumph became dust. Their riders remembered not as immortals but as echoes. Venice, too, proud in its dominion over Mediterranean trade, saw its power crumble when sea routes shifted, just as Palmyra once crumbled when caravans changed direction. The wheel mocked their pride, turning steadily, binding their destinies to repetition. Merchants, more than rulers, anticipated these returns. They understood that demand never vanished, only changed its form. When silk grew scarce, spice took its place. When spice waned, sugar or tobacco rose. When those dimmed, oil and data emerged. To merchants, this was no progress, but cycle. Hunger is eternal, only its costumes shifting. They whispered to each other in markets, "This has all been seen before." Their words carried more truth than proclamations of kings, for they recognized the road's eternal face beneath its masks. The wheel also repeats in suffering. Farmers crushed by tribute in Persia were mirrored by peasants taxed into ruin in Rome, then echoed centuries later in colonies drained for distant capitals. Hunger, debt, and silence cycle endlessly, each generation believing its pain unique, yet all walking the same grooves carved by history. Empires call collapse tragedy, but the wheel calls it rhythm. The suffering of the many sustains the glory of the few, and when the many can bear no more, the wheel turns, shifting splendor to ashes once again. Modern BRICS nations walk the same circle, though clothed in modern language. Their search for independence mirrors old alliances, their corridors repeat ancient roads. Their banks echo old tribute, their summits echo old treaties, their ambition mirrors empires long gone. They declare themselves new, yet the wheel of return spins beneath them. History is not invention but repetition. To see clearly is to admit that we have walked this road before, and we will walk it again, until silence falls and the cycle begins anew. The wheel is merciless because it does not forget. What empires call progress is often only repetition with brighter costumes. Roads glitter with new materials, armies march with new weapons, markets hum with new currencies, yet the same rise, the same hunger, the same collapse returns. Palmyra's colonnades echo in modern ports, Rome's bread riots echo in today's protests, Mongol raids echo in cyber attacks across digital steppes. The wheel carries all forward, yet all forward is backward, circling endlessly upon grooves carved long ago. To walk history is to walk a circle. The Silk Road's ruins whisper this truth most clearly. Travelers who stumbled upon abandoned caravanserais saw not only the past, but their own future reflected. They knew other cities would one day stand as ruins, their markets hushed, their stones scattered. The wheel is prophecy, and ruins are its scriptures. Each collapsed empire testifies not to failure, but to inevitability. The road continues, but those who claimed it fade, replaced by others who will in turn vanish. Memory bends into repetition, and repetition is destiny. Merchants carried this wisdom silently. They adapted, shifted routes, survived where empires perished. To them, collapse was not tragedy but transition, another turn of the wheel. When Rome fell, trade bent toward Byzantium. When Byzantium faltered, it bent toward Venice. When Venice waned, it bent toward Lisbon and London. Now it bends toward BRICS. Merchants never wept at ruins. They simply walked onward, for they knew the wheel had no end. To survive was to move with it, to recognize its rhythm and accept its inevitability. The wheel is not cruel, only impartial. It does not favor one empire above another, nor does it punish without cause. It simply turns, carrying all with it. Kings may rage, priests may pray, merchants may whisper, but none can halt its motion. It is carved into the earth itself, into rivers, deserts, mountains, and seas. The road is its visible thread, winding endlessly across ages. To mistake the wheel for progress is to misunderstand it. To see it as repetition is to glimpse truth. Modern powers, too, are spokes upon this wheel. BRICS proclaims new order, yet its ambitions echo those of countless predecessors. Its roads may glitter with steel, its alliances shine with treaties, but the wheel has seen it all before. Hunger will rise, borders will burn, silence will fall, and the circle will begin anew. The Silk Road teaches that the wheel cannot be escaped, only endured. To see it clearly is to walk humbly, to know that every empire is but a moment in its eternal rotation. Thus the 14th law is revealed, the wheel of return. Roads are not straight lines into the future, but circles that fold back upon themselves. Empires repeat the same patterns, dressed in different robes, singing the same songs with new instruments. The road is eternal. Only its travelers change. And as the wheel turns, each empire learns what the last already knew. The same road is walked forever. Every road begins with promise. It stretches outward like destiny made visible, luring merchants, armies, and pilgrims toward horizons unseen. Yet every road also ends. Sometimes it ends in silence, sometimes in conquest, sometimes in neglect. The Silk Road taught this merciless lesson. Not all journeys arrive at glory. Some lead to deserts that swallow caravans, to ruins where markets once thrived, to cities forgotten by maps. The last gate is the point where connection fails, where ambition meets its boundary, where the road reveals that not every path carries forward. For Palmyra, the last gate was Rome's fury. The city that had thrived as desert jewel, commanding caravans between east and west, became rubble when its queen defied the empire. Markets that once shimmered with silk and spice turned to ash, and the desert reclaimed the stones. For Byzantium, the last gate was the cannon, when Ottoman fire shattered walls that had endured for centuries. For Merv, it was the silence of shifting caravans, traders abandoning it for safer ground. Each city believed itself eternal until the road itself withdrew. Every last gate is both ending and revelation. The road does not belong to those who walk it. Merchants dreaded the last gate more than armies. To them, it meant routes closed forever, partners lost, wealth vanished. They marked such places in whispers, telling tales of ghost towns where once thriving bazaars had gone dark. To stumble upon such ruins was to see the fragility of trade itself, to recognize that every caravan risked walking into emptiness. The road was not infinite. It carried dead ends as well as horizons. Each gate stood as warning that fortune could collapse into futility in a single season. The last gate was not always destruction. Sometimes it was transformation. Old routes closed, but new ones opened. The Silk Road by land faded as maritime routes rose, shifting wealth from caravanserais to ports. Cities that once thrived on camel bells fell silent, while harbors awakened to sails. The last gate of land routes was the first gate of sea lanes. Yet for those left behind, this shift was indistinguishable from death. Their roads led nowhere, their splendor dissolved, their legacy buried beneath dunes. The wheel turned, but not all could follow. Modern corridors, too, risk their last gates. A port built with grandeur may empty when trade diverts elsewhere. A railway laid with ambition may rust when politics shifts. A digital network may collapse in silence when trust evaporates. BRICS builds with confidence, yet its roads too may end in last gates unseen. For every road carries both promise and futility. The lesson of the Silk Road is not only connection but limitation. Roads cannot stretch forever. They must one day face the last gate where destiny halts. The last gate often appears without warning. A city may glitter one season and stand abandoned the next, its markets hushed, its roads overgrown. Travelers who return after years find the place transformed, as though time itself had locked the gates. History shows countless such vanishing points, shining outposts reduced to whispers, crossroads erased from maps. The last gate is not merely a ruin, it is the moment when continuity breaks, when motion halts, and when silence claims dominion over stone. Empires fear armies, but they should fear these gates more, for gates close without trumpet or blade. Consider Chang'an, the Tang dynasty's radiant heart, once the greatest city in the world, filled with voices of traders, monks, and diplomats. Its grandeur seemed invincible. Yet when dynastic decline and rebellion struck, the city shrank. Roads that once converged upon its gates diverted elsewhere, caravans avoiding turmoil. The metropolis became shadow of itself, its vast avenues too wide for the few who remained. Chang'an's fall was not explosion but contraction, a gate closing so slowly it felt like dusk, stretching into endless night. Even greatness can lead nowhere once roads abandon it. The Crusader states, too, learned the lore of last gates. Their castles once dominated trade corridors, taxing caravans and pilgrims alike. Yet when alliances fractured and supply faltered, their strongholds became empty monuments. Gates once bristling with banners fell silent. The roads bypassed them, shifting toward safer hands, and the castles became fossils of ambition. The stone remained, but the flow was gone. Roads are rivers, and rivers leave behind dry channels when they change course. These channels are the last gates, reminders of power that could not adapt. Merchants often told stories of these endings as warnings. They spoke of once great bazaars where weeds grew between stones, of inns where doors rotted in their hinges. Such tales were not only elegies, but instructions. Avoid paths that lead to silence. Traders learned to sense when a road neared its last gate. Too many taxes, too much danger, too little trust. They shifted routes before collapse was visible, leaving cities bewildered by sudden absence. The last gate is rarely foreseen by rulers, but merchants feel its breath first. Silence at the last gate is heavier than any conquest. For conquest leaves scars, but silence leaves voids. To walk through abandoned streets where lanterns no longer burn, to touch walls once bright with banners now faded, is to sense the inevitability of decline. Roads give, but they also withdraw. And when they withdraw, no force can reopen the gate. Armies cannot compel caravans, decrees cannot summon markets, prayers cannot awaken silence. The last gate is final because it is chosen not by rulers, but by absence itself. Modern empires too face these unseen thresholds. A port that loses trade is as final as a city swallowed by desert. A digital network abandoned becomes ghost road, humming without purpose. BRICS builds its corridors in steel and stone, but even they risk leading nowhere if trust fails, if roots shift, if silence spreads. The last gate waits, invisible but certain, reminding that not all roads endure. Some shine only briefly before fading into emptiness, their grandeur a memory carved into dust. The last gate is not always ruin of stone. Sometimes it is ruin of spirit. When confidence dies, when trust evaporates, when travelers no longer believe in the safety of a path, the road ends even if its stones remain. A merchant may stand before a city's open gates yet feel them closed, for absence of trust is as final as walls of iron. In this way, the last gate is a mirror of the human heart. It reveals not just where trade fails, but where faith fails, where the idea of connection collapses. Without belief, the road leads nowhere. Empires often deny their approach to the last gate. Rulers speak of renewal, promise of prosperity, declarations of eternity. Yet the signs are visible: markets quieter, taxes heavier, allies fewer, whispers sharper. The last gate does not slam shut. It drifts closed, inch by inch, while leaders pretend the hinge is whole. By the time they notice, caravans have already diverted, merchants have already abandoned, silence has already spread. The gate closes not by decree but by neglect, not by enemy but by inevitability. The Silk Road's history is filled with such endings. Cities like Merv, Nishapur and Ray once sparkled as stars of trade, yet their brilliance faded, leaving only ruins. Some fell to conquest, others to plague, but many simply dwindled, their gates no longer passed through. Travelers stumbled upon them centuries later, puzzled at their silence. The truth was simple: the road had shifted, and they were left behind. Their gates, once open to the world, had become doors to nowhere. The law was merciless, but it was constant. No road endures forever. Merchants endured by accepting this truth. They did not mourn gates that closed. They moved toward gates that opened. Their wisdom lay in mobility, in refusal to cling. Empires clung to monuments and fell. Merchants followed the living pulse and survived. To them, the last gate was not tragedy, but inevitability, a reminder that permanence is illusion. They whispered, "Every road ends, but the journey continues elsewhere." Their pragmatism ensured survival when empires collapsed beneath denial. Modern roads risk their own last gates. Pipelines rust when alliances fracture, ports empty when routes shift, digital networks collapse when confidence breaks. BRICS forges new corridors with ambition, but the last gate waits. It may appear as economic stagnation, as sudden silence in ports, as partners walking away. Like ancient cities, modern hubs may shine for a generation before being abandoned. Steel may last longer than stone, but silence endures longer than both. The law of last gates is timeless. Roads promise future, but many futures end in emptiness. Thus the 15th law is revealed: the last gate. All roads lead somewhere until they lead nowhere. The Silk Road teaches that every connection carries within it the possibility of abandonment, every promise the seed of silence. Empires dream of eternity, but gates are mortal. To pass through them is to walk toward both glory and nothingness. And when the last gate closes, no crown, no army, no prayer can force it open again. Roads end, silence begins. The story of roads is the story of empires, and the story of empires is the story of us all. We walk through ruins as through mirrors, seeing in broken stones the reflections of our own time. Roads promised connection, but they also delivered fragility. Wealth dazzled, but it drained. Borders burned, hunger ruled, silence waited. Each law was merciless, each lesson eternal. To study the Silk Road is to see not only history but prophecy. The same cycle, the same wheel, turning again beneath our feet. We believe ourselves new, yet the dust whispers. All has been seen before. The law of roads taught us that paths bind as much as they free. Every empire that opened arteries of commerce also exposed itself to danger, for the same roots that delivered wealth carried ruin. The law of wealth showed that gold is gravity, pulling empires into hunger for more until their own weight crushed them. The law of distance reminded us that geography is destiny, mountains and deserts marking limits no ambition could cross. And the masks of empire revealed that power is theatre, fragile as silk, splendid only while the stage remains lit. Each law a thread, woven together into the great fabric of rise and fall. The whispering markets told us that voices, not armies, guide the road. Merchants whispered truths that rulers ignored, and their whispers reshaped destiny. The shadow of collapse warned that rot creeps silently, that neglect corrodes more surely than conquest. The breath of empire showed that expansion always ends in exhaustion, that lungs too full cannot rise again. The weight of tribute reminded us that splendor is paid for by the many, their backs bowed beneath burdens unseen. The fire of borders told us that every gate is also a furnace, where peace flickers fragile and war waits like a spark. The law of shadows reminded us that unseen powers, bankers, priests, spies, and guilds, steer history more than crowns. The pact of mirrors revealed that alliances gleam bright but shatter easily, reflections dazzling but brittle. The law of hunger showed us that resources are war drums, beating louder than ambition. Summoning armies with rhythm none can resist. The fall of silence taught us that the end is not fire but emptiness, that roads die when footsteps cease, and silence is the truest conqueror. And finally, the wheel of return and the last gate showed us that history is circular, that every road leads eventually to nowhere, and yet begins again in new form. What do these laws reveal? That empire is not destiny but condition, not permanence but pattern. To build is to invite collapse, to expand is to invite exhaustion, to trade is to invite silence. Yet within this endless repetition lies meaning. The fragility of empires is the mirror of our mortality. Just as cities fall, so too do lives, yet their echoes linger, in stories, in ruins, in whispers. The Silk Road has fallen silent, yet its memory lives, reshaping itself as maritime routes, as global trade, as digital corridors. Roads may close, but the journey continues, for the desire to connect is as eternal as the stars. And perhaps that is the final truth, not ruin, but return. Roads go dark, but others open. Markets fall silent, but new ones awaken. Empires collapse, but humanity endures, whispering the same desires in new tongues. The wheel is not cruelty, but rhythm, and to hear it is to know that nothing is final. Even the last gate is not the end, only a threshold to the next beginning. Dust rises, dust settles, and from dust new paths emerge. The Silk Road teaches us not despair, but humility, to know our place in cycles older than crowns, older than cities, older than memory itself. Now the roads are quiet. Lanterns burn low, stars shimmer above the ruins, wind whispers through colonnades where markets once thrived. The laws remain, carved not in stone but in silence, waiting for those who walk after us. And as we drift towards sleep, let us remember, empires are mortal, but the rhythm is eternal. Roads bind, wealth dazzles, borders burn, hunger rules, silence falls. Yet through it all, humanity walks onward, seeking connection, carrying memory, turning forever upon the wheel of dust and stars.